Tools sprawled all over the workbench, and then someone shouted that he'd done it. He turned to the girl and asked if she'd give it a shot, and she nodded right away. She slipped the glasses on, stared in shock, and her hands started trembling with pure excitement. The boy asked for the result, and the girl gasped that she could see everything. Again, then fumbled with her brand new glasses, said it was crystal clear, turned to Lord Arthur and laughed, "It's incredible," and the boy beamed at the news. And that's how the young man's wild story exploded into life. Morning burst in, and Arthur jolted awake, then stretched like he was ready to tear into the day. He came back as a reincarnated soul, born into this world, and the moment he opened his eyes, that kid was already knee-deep in household chores. Then it hit him, this was the reincarnation everyone had been talking about. He couldn't help but miss his old life, since he'd already spent 5 years here, and when he realized he could cheat, his eyes went wide. So he threw himself into trying everything in this new life. Yep, he went all in, unlocking statuses, going wild with skills pulled straight from reality, and slamming on enhancement after enhancement. The boy sank under the weight of his results, staring into a barrel of water until he caught his own reflection, and there it hit him hard. He was only 5 years old. He was born to Martina and the Marquis of Wewagennel, yet there was zero love between them, and no marriage of convenience, either. It all kicked off at the Crown Prince's wedding, because the Marquis already clocked what was coming next, the arrival of the next heir. Even with a legal wife already by his side, and an heir to boost his odds of getting close to the royal family. He started filling his life with mistresses, counting on them to bring him valuable children. But to get noble blood, he had to hunt down struggling noble families. My mother's family was caught in the same trap, so she marched into the Marquis house to settle her debts, and trust me, things didn't stay on track for even a second. A furious man's shout tore through the room. He claimed the newborn son had no gift at all, blasted him as a defective child, and cursed the women who gave birth as worthless trash, so the protagonist and his mother were dragged right back to the Viscount's house. Even though the Roman 6 account had no idea what was going on, he still took their word and accepted it. Living with his mother, the hero soaked up lessons every single day, and yeah, he really did learn a lot over and over. He uncovered the truth about his family, dug into what happened with his mother, and then felt the magic of this world hit him like a spark. Only then did it hit him. Now he finally understood why they labeled him defective. In this world, most people are born with magic, and that magic comes in 6 flavors: fire, wind, water, earth, light, and darkness. Magic crackled through her like electricity, but she could only draw power from her own attribute. Arthur blurted that he had 0 attribute, so magic was off the table, and he couldn't wrap his head around why he hadn't been a mage in his past life. Meanwhile, the maids were whispering about him, demanding if he should toss out that trash because his mother was defective. In the Viscount's house, everything was getting worse by the day, and despite it all, his mother had always loved him. Then bam, someone knocked hard on the door, and they hurried to ask if Martina was free. Grandpa was right there when Arthur's mother leaned in. Then the man burst out, saying he'd finally snagged a husband for his daughter, and that she'd be happy from this day on. Martina leaned in and demanded, "So what happens to Arthur now?" Grandpa's voice snapped like a whip, "Send your son to an orphanage." Mom and the boy went stone still. Martina blurted out that everything made sense to her, then fell silent for a beat. The protagonist dropped his head and the truth hit hard. There was nothing they could do. It was only a matter of time because it was defective. The guy dropped his head. 3 days later, his mother packed up and vanished from their home, and the young man snapped, asking if she truly meant it. She said she already had everything lined up with the Viscount. He could tell that wasn't what he was asking, but once he understood why, he swallowed his words and let it go. They pushed toward a village tucked on Baron Merle's lands, and their mother knew a friend there, someone who'd married the Baron's heir, so that contact lined them up with a warm place to stay for a small fee. The boy blurted that he needed to study alchemy, and that's exactly where he finally discovered what his magic could truly do. Even with no attribute to back him up, he refused to give up the skills he'd forged, because losing that knowledge wasn't an option. The young man clenched his fists and zeroed in, then poured hours into the library, devouring books, studying literature, and mapping out every possible path to level up. That's how he tripped onto the truth about alchemy, because in this world it's more than magic. It's the toolset for processing, shaping, extracting, and heating, and it doesn't need an attribute at all. After reading it, Arthur burst out that everything would work out for him. Then reality hit like a brick wall, way harsher than he ever expected. Alchemy didn't run on magic alone. It demanded rare reagents and specific matrices, and every spell needed its own exact set, and that price tag was brutal. Most alchemists survived by whipping up potions for cash. Everyone needed those potions, so they refused to jack up the price, keeping both alchemists and buyers profitable while padding the ruler's coffers so he could keep feeding the townspeople. The young man stared at the truth, no allies, no potions yet, and that crushing weight swallowed his heart, turning his mood to pure sadness. To brew the potions, he had to gather rare ingredients and magical water that soaked in attribute magic, because without that attribute power, he couldn't make the potion himself. So he dove straight into material alchemy, no attribute needed to refine, letting him forge brand new items from his old life. Then boom, new trouble hit, pricey sensors. The boy reeled from it like someone had smashed him over the head with a heavy weight. Arthur started wondering if the matrices could be built cheaper, because those rare metals that conduct magic can't just be swapped out for some bargain substitute. Then the hero had to figure out what they were really for. Boom, an idea hit him hard. Those matrices existed just to nail the magic circles perfectly, so if he could draw the circles straight with magic, the matrices would be useless. Then another problem hit hard. He couldn't even see the magic, and if he trusted his own senses, the circle warped and failed. He froze, not knowing what to do, until his mother leaned in and asked, "Is everything okay?" But Arthur wouldn't budge. He had to make magic visible, so he tapped every tool he knew: conversion, hardness, and viscosity. A wild, natural, magical fog shimmered in the air, glowing like a warning and a promise at once, so he vowed, if he could recreate those exact conditions, it would work. The fog was fueled by humidity and temperature swings, and to lock that magic in, he had to dial in the right mix, concentrating the magic, tuning the humidity, and controlling hardness, viscosity, and temperature. Suddenly he summoned a swirling magical mist. His mother had never seen anything like it before, and when he called it lewd, she gasped because it wasn't some outside trick, it was internal magic. He then lit up the magic circle and took one more step closer to becoming an alchemist. He stared at his mother, burning with determination, and vowed to make her the happiest woman alive. Mom laid a hand on her son's shoulder and told Art, "Wake up," then reminded him they'd already arrived. It was their brand new home, sparkling like it had never been touched. The hero spotted a girl up ahead and watched her lean in, asking, "Are you Martin?" The woman swept in and introduced herself as Stefana, sent straight from the Baron, and the protagonist immediately clocked a mark on the maid's neck, surveillance on one side, protection on the other. Martina lit up and told Stefana how thrilled she was to finally meet her. For 2 whole years they stayed that way in Helmendorf, and his mother stood in the field, eyes on Art, asking if he was really okay, because from that day on she needed to know. Art just grinned and told her, "I'm fine." June hit and the wheat had to be harvested, plus the taxes had to be paid. Their field was tiny, and Stefana plus her mom were barely holding on, so Stefana finally turned to a friend for help. The kid's job was to bind bundles of wheat, but every day he hated his own body. Arthur wasn't used to throwing punches. While the wheat got dried, threshed, and packed for tax time, the farmers got hit with taxes for every single head. The harvester had to hunt for any weird irregularities, because one crop failure or a family illness could wreck the field's condition overnight. Ahead, a young man suddenly materialized, and the hero snapped, "Who are you?" It was Katie, the village tax collector. The hero scrutinized him like he could read his soul, like he already understood the whole story. Then, right out of nowhere, a shout tore through the air, "Tina." The protagonist didn't like seeing that arrogant punk, Audie Kill, the village chief's son, and he shot him a question. Were those 2 women struggling, and would he actually help them this year? Because for all his big talk, the guy was nothing but trouble, and he kept pestering the protagonist's mother nonstop. Audie popped back up last year he just watched, but this time he latched onto his mother with way too much attention, and everyone got uneasy. He even offered to help, yet Martina shut him down, and then he suddenly told the woman who might be his future wife to not be shy, flipping her whole reaction. The man blurted that they had to settle the wedding date, but the woman stared like she had no idea what he meant. Then his mood lifted as he joked that Martina, like always, was just playing it modest, and he suggested they push this talk to another day. The mother and her son just couldn't make sense of what happened, so Martina grabbed her art and poured everything into it. She fired the question at him, "What would you do if Audicle showed up as your dad?" The boy just shrugged, he'd bolt and run. Mom burst out laughing. She swore that they'd always stay together. Then the young man made it brutally clear. He never planned to marry her off. Stefana demanded to know what happened while he was in the capital. Her mother shrugged and said she had no clue, and all they did was trade polite hellos, but the village elder insisted she had agreed to something, and that's when Stefana's rage exploded, because she couldn't figure out what any of it even meant. Arthur brushed Autochiel's words off as pure nonsense. Then the hero pushed for Kadith to step in and give a proper, formal no, while Martina fretted that it might end up weighing on him. He weighed it in his head, but asking the villagers felt like setting himself up for a biased answer, so Stefana stepped in and said she'd talk to Mr. Kadith instead. She'd seen him before back at the Baron's house, so yeah, that part made perfect sense. Martina asked, "Can I do it myself?" And her friend lit up with a huge yes, so they locked in and kept harvesting together while Arthur erupted in pure joy. Days slipped by and everyone finally saw it. The work was done, and now they had to rush to the meeting. They finally reached the main hut and the sage clocked them instantly, like he'd been waiting. He didn't waste time talking, he just asked if Lord Katie was here. Then he blinked in surprise when he realized they weren't even trying to negotiate the wedding. The protagonist felt it in his bones, this had to be a mistake. In this village, if a commoner so much as declared their marriage to the village elder or priest, everyone treated them like an enemy, and now they were seconds away from announcing their refusal. Stefana slammed the table and said she'd be the one steering the negotiations. Then the man roared, demanding to know why some servant was butting in, and Stefana fired back that she was the Baron's servant, leaving him stunned, while Martina snapped that her job was to protect Martina, and the boy finally understood. Martina shot back that first, she's not marrying Audihil. The boy snapped his head toward Tina and shook it hard, saying he got her worries, but he couldn't wait either, he needed air. The hero had no clue which air they meant. The mother kept insisting over and over, "I wasn't asked to marry him and I never agreed." Then thump, she slammed the table, demanding it stop. "You did propose," Tickle shot back, "and I swear she said yes." He couldn't wrap his head around it because, yeah, she'd lied to them all. Suddenly Katie burst out, shouting at everyone to calm down, and then he called out to the prefects, bowing his head and apologizing to them. Martina pressed on, demanding to know when and where he popped the question, and Arthur couldn't ignore how tightly tense his mother looked. Nautical looked so grim that worry started clawing at her heart. His mom stared at him and he grinned, telling her the only thing he could do was cheer her up and squeeze her hand. Audicul kicked off his tail by saying his dad finally told him it was time to get married, and that's when he turned toward Tina, someone he'd had a crush on for ages, only for her to jump in and explain exactly why he'd been assuming he liked her. The man slammed his fist into his own chest and roared that another girl had said she wouldn't smile at anyone she didn't like. Then Martina froze, clueless which girl he meant, until everyone finally caught on. It was just a misunderstanding. Martina shrugged off the whole brothel situation, saying it didn't matter to her, until a damn smile started a misunderstanding, and she vowed that next time she'd treat them like insects. The village chief and his son clocked it, and suddenly felt the fear hit so hard they couldn't breathe. Katie pressed Audihel for the details of the proposal, and he told her he'd asked permission to pick a flower, like people do these days, so Katie nodded and confirmed she was on board, and Martina admitted she'd just assumed it was really about flowers, which is why she gave her own permission too. The village chief grilled her about why she wasn't planning for tomorrow, and he shot back that she'd think about it only if she had to. She clenched her son's hand tighter, then swore it would be her son who stole her future, and she refused to marry Audicul. He blared at her to stop mocking him. Little Star didn't even dare to argue. Then he reminded her bluntly that she'd totally forgotten how much she owed him for helping her, and Audicul snapped and started screaming that she was a bad girl. Katie snapped that it was straight-up discrimination. Then the village chief blurted that he was just thinking about his son, and Stefana shot back, saying there was nothing left to argue. It wasn't a proposal at all, and nobody ever agreed. She just decided it was time to shut it down for good. The girl begged to deliver the report to the Baron, but Catiath demanded answers about the mayor, and Stefano shut it down, saying none of it mattered and everyone should just feel it out, because somehow they'd already ended the whole conflict. Now there's a brutal gulf between them and the village elder's family, but at least Arthur's mother is safe and unharmed. 2 weeks had blown by since the wedding chaos, and Ottochil barely showed up, just once, bringing a huge bouquet of bold, beautiful flowers. Martina screamed, terrified he'd stomp all over their land again, and then, just like that, he vanished for good. Arthur couldn't help but think how lucky they were that Ottochil wasn't a masochist. That day he was thrashing wheat, and the boy let out a heavy sigh as he sifted the millet. He couldn't stop dreaming about how incredible it would be to mechanize those tools. Then the moment the thrashing ended, it was time to hit the fields and harvest the grain. Martina told Tefana to go on ahead, and Tefana immediately agreed. The two of them hurled wind magic into the air and copied it perfectly. The boy realized magic left him powerless, so he grimly set to work, packing the filthy wheat. Out of the 15 sacks, 6 got snapped up as taxes, and the cadet was counting every last one. Arthur hefted that brutal weight and couldn't help thinking he still wanted to build a thrashing machine someday. From the memories of a past life, he felt like he could do this, so he pushed the idea hard. Let's go grab what we need to make farming tools. But his mom just burst into laughter, saying it was way too early for him to be doing that, and the boy nodded along, because it honestly felt perfectly logical. Even if Stefan had taught him fencing ahead of time, his raw strength still wouldn't have gotten him into the forest. Of course, Stefana could have handled it solo, but she couldn't tell him how to grab the stuff, and the hero didn't have a clue what was even hiding in that grove. He started assuming his wandering had limits, that it only covered the area around the house. Then, boom, something looked wrong on the side, and he spun over to investigate. The amber glow filled the air, and the tree's thick bark oozed resin like it was spilling heat right into your bones. The boy took a bite, grimaced, and confirmed it was totally poison. Then his eyes lit up like, wait, what if I turned this into gem honey? Gem honey was rare, sure, but since insects were trapped inside it, women didn't want it, and that cold reality crushed the price. But there was one more play: sell those coins to a collector and he'd pocket a little cash, so the whole time he just couldn't stop thinking about the coins. He knew amber was fossilized resin, but he couldn't figure out how anyone could even get it, turn it into amber by crushing it or drying it out. That's the whole mystery. Arthur decided to go for it because if he failed, he'd only lose pride, not anything else. He whipped out a tiny knife and started experimenting on the spot, then fired off his materialization skill. The young man knelt and worked tirelessly, scooping up every last drop of resin oozing from the great tree's bark. Minutes piled up, half an hour to be exact. Then he snatched up a small glass like, yeah, this is plenty. He had to split those impurities apart, and this was his first real alchemy outside training. So the young man sucked in a few deep breaths, decided to build the outer sphere circuit first, then follow it with the inner purification circuit. The sphere was built to shut out outside forces and keep everything sealed in, but he didn't stop there. He filled it with resin to make sure. Arthur first ripped the impurities out, then poured magic straight into the internal purification circuit. After that, he grabbed the sphere and wiped the purification circuit clean. He pressed on, ripped it out, then sketched a full extraction diagram. Then he squeezed every last drop of moisture out, separated it clean, and boom, his resin was fully dried. The hero cradled a tiny lump of stone in his hands, staring in disbelief at what he'd pulled off. But then the stone shattered in an instant, and the protagonist finally understood he'd failed. Just draining the water and drying it wasn't enough to make it strong. Then he decided to crush the limits, using pressure and extraction at the exact same time. Basically, the magic circle was built from one simple pattern, sphere pattern and the technique pattern, both tied to one effect, and when he switched up his game, he didn't hesitate to redraw everything, which meant the pressure extraction couldn't hit right away. You can smash multiple techniques together at once, drop several technique diagrams into one circle, then the moment the spheres and techniques lose their perfect balance, everything gets thrown off. Maybe stacking the circles into a cube would have made the spheres overlap, but Arthur snapped to the truth. This wasn't the move he was meant to make. He could use those techniques one by one in the sphere, but that still screamed for something more flexible. This news hit him like a jolt. Every book was built for matrices and clean lab conditions, but he refused to play by the rules, so he fused the schematic technique straight into the central sphere, stacking up to 9 at once, and crowned it the compound magic circle. What? The rematch for the gemstone honey was locked in, and this young guy sketched out the purification, pressure, and extraction like it was a battle plan. Then the circle actually worked, and the hero burst out laughing, because the result was so perfectly flawless it demanded a little refining. After Arthur's very first shot at making honey gemstone, he went on a relentless grind of trial after trial, until he finally cracked stable production and launched full-scale mass production. So in his spare time he kept cranking them out non-stop, stuffing the leftovers in the barn, and when he looked back, some of them were straight-up gigantic. Martina slipped up behind him and demanded to know why that beetle trapped in the gem was so massive. Then the boy jolted in surprise when he finally saw his mother. He told her it was all built from resin, and Martina's jaw dropped like she couldn't believe alchemy could pull off something like this. She fired back, asking if he'd shown it to anyone else, and the hero shook his head. Then his mother leaned in and ordered him to keep it secret, saying his creation could fetch a crazy 5 gold pieces. Arthur's jaw dropped, because he'd figured it wouldn't be worth that much at all, and he couldn't stop wondering whether anyone else could make it too. His mother dropped to her knees before him, locked eyes with him, and gripped his hand tight. She asked if he'd ever really thought about his future, and he froze, suddenly realizing he'd been totally blind to it, because all he cared about was one thing: making his mother happy. All he had was alchemy, and even that wasn't enough, so he told his mother, "I'm going to the Academy of Nobility." In their kingdom, alchemy wasn't something common people learned. It was locked behind the nobility's private academy in the capital. Getting in wasn't some simple step. It required a recommendation from a noble family, and for him, a man with no obvious status or shine, this world might as well have been locked behind a wall. Still, his mother pressed him on how real his intentions were, and the boy swore with zero hesitation that he meant every word. With her palm pressed to her chest, she told him plainly it was his choice. They had to move fast, dumping everything into her hands. Then Arthur's stomach dropped as his mother's sudden plan hit him, and unease crawled in. Weeks slipped by, and on their mother's orders, they finally made their way to the county capital of Maristat. Martina snapped to her son with her plans right then: meet the Baron, sell the honey gems, and walk out with a servant/bodyguard. There was also one more personal errand. She had to reach out to a friend of hers, an adventurer. The boy blinked in shock, but his mother shrugged and said, "That guy, chances are he's already out there adventuring now." So their time here wouldn't last long. Arthur couldn't believe it. This man, once a noble, was now doing a job like this. Getting to the county capital was a brutal hassle, but the moment Martina heard about the honey gems, she snapped into action and knew it was time to leave, right now. They tossed coins at merchants and rode with them, but the road didn't stay quiet. Goblins attacked, thieves swarmed, and only a squad of merchant adventurers, acting like a wall, kept them from getting wiped out. A mom and her son chilled in a roomy hall, trading sips of tea, when boom, the door swung open out of nowhere. Stefana burst in like, "I'm back," and straight up told everyone, "Come see us tomorrow morning." Martina grinned at her, amazed at how fast they'd pulled everything together. The maid said the window was open, something that almost never happens, since they usually have to wait 2 whole weeks for an audience. It was a rare break in the usual rules. With that in mind, the young man started gearing up for tomorrow and couldn't stop thinking, why would his mother even want to meet the Baron? Martina grabbed Arthur and Stefana's attention and told them to wait right there for her in the gazebo. The maid burst in, grabbed her attention, and told the woman to stay put right there. Martina lounged on the sofa in that huge room, and then the man burst in late and rushed out an apology for the wait. Martina lit up and greeted him, thrilled he was healthy, and he told her the only thing that mattered was keeping her safe and unharmed. He stepped up to the girl and told her what Katie's report had revealed. Stefana really had helped her. Martina replayed the whole encounter with Adakil. He apologized for intruding, then hit her with this warning: she had to understand what people might be thinking about her. Martina couldn't shake the question, how did everyone see her? She shut her eyes tight, and in a village packed with nothing but commoners, her noble upbringing practically shouted its difference. She couldn't help wondering if maybe she should keep her clothes spotless, and when she admitted it brought real trouble for her, the Baron nodded like, just realizing the problem is already half the battle. That gentleman leaned in and demanded to know why she'd come to town at such a terrible hour, and he figured she couldn't be here unless she had business with him. Martina made it crystal clear, she really did have something important to tell him. At first, she planned to show it to His Excellency. If he took interest, she'd offer it next. Then she pulled out the honey gem and held it up for everyone to see. The Baron stared at the box like it was pure treasure, awestruck by both the sheer size and the wild, striking motion of the exhibits. Everything looked incredible, and Martina thanked him for the kind words. The man cut in and said, clear as day, that he's not a jewelry collector. She caught his meaning, secretly hoping this would earn him favor later, and she shot back, all right, then I'll haul these gems straight to the Merchant Guild and sell them for cash. The man couldn't believe she'd chosen to get rid of something that rare, but she just said that after everything that's happened, and because of what she plans next, she needs to hire even more security. The man started worrying about Stefano's situation, and Martina shut that down. She needed a guard who'd put her son first, no excuses, and if anything happened to Fauna, Master Barlin's servant, she'd lose the only person she could count on to carry out her orders. She figured they'd better snag a couple more servants before Stefano came back, and the man told her straight up, good help is impossible to find. He let Martina take command of Stefana, and that came with a price. Stefana had to be pulled out of her current role. The woman pressed him, are you really sure? And he said, yes, thank you, because her help is what turned Rosanna into his son's daughter-in-law. Martina shot a question, was Rosanna still on that expedition? He leaned in and said, she already led a squad to wipe out the monsters. And at the academy, she instantly drew everyone's eyes, the moment the protagonist's mother remembered her. 3 days dragged by and Rosanna's return was almost here, when the Baron pulled Martina aside and demanded she speak with her, because he was sure Rosanna's destiny wasn't war. The heroine froze, acting like nothing had even changed, and I'm like, if we're hunting monsters, why can't they just hire mercenaries through some guild? The Baron said 3 days had slipped by, and that their quick yes to meeting him couldn't be random, something had to be going on. Martina rushed back to the family and told Stefano she had the right to command now. Stefana didn't get it right away, but once they broke it down for her, she realized she could now put Arthur first, so she could switch up her moves fast, depending on what the situation demanded. Stefana followed the hero's mother's orders, but now she had to drop everything and put her mother's new command first. Martina asked her son if he minded while she prepared to sell the 7 honey gems, and he nodded like he fully trusted her. Then she thanked him. They burst into the merchant guild, and the boy instantly clocked the vibe. It felt just like an old jewelry store. The jeweler broke into a warm smile and greeted the young lady right at the entrance. The man swore he never lies when it comes to women. Then Martina hauled out the box and announced she wanted to sell what was inside, while the protagonist peeked out from behind his mother, eyes wide. The man swung the lid open and blurted that they were honey gems, then dangled one shining silver coin as the offer. Martina paused, staring like the price was way too low. She was told honey gemstones usually end up in jewelry, and each one alone barely matters, but stack enough together and their price suddenly skyrockets. Martina spun toward Stefana, then out of nowhere, she yanked open a second box and spilled a whole pile of tiny stones onto a tray, and the jeweler practically burst with joy at the finished collection. The hero figured right on the spot that he'd somehow grabbed every last one of them. The jeweler counted them up and declared, 24 in total, and the whole haul adds up to 16 gold coins and 2 silver coins. Those tiny honey gems skyrocketed in worth the moment you snagged them all, so you had to finish the collection. The jeweler raised his offer, 17 gold pieces, for the finished collection, and just like that, they struck a deal. Martina grabbed the bag of money and thanked the seller, and as she walked off, they shouted that they'd love to see her and her friends again, and they were told to show up the second they could. The salesman slid into the chair opposite the protagonist's mother and demanded whether the deal was done. She shot back, no, and said she needed 2 servants/guards instead. The boy leaned in and told Stefan, I'm a speed type, we just need attack power and some real battle experience, and his mother nodded and asked, so where do we find candidates who match exactly what we need? The boy demanded why they needed those heavy-duty storage spots, and they told him it wasn't random. Some customers were actually just hiding a personal grudge against the servant. These precautions had to be taken to keep the staff safe, and the young man nearly froze the moment he heard it. The chief gestured at the servants and basically said, this is exactly what you need. 2 target shooters, a spearman, an axeman, and a hammerman lined up ready to go. The boy snapped that men weren't fit for this role, and he couldn't stand the way they stared at his mother. Martina spun around and froze. There was a girl standing right in front of her. She demanded who the stranger was, and the girl stepped closer. They told her that right in front of them stood a dwarf, hammer in hand, and this little beauty stared at Arthur so hard that when her eyes met his, the whole moment snapped alive. The dwarf admitted that when she ditched blacksmithing for adventuring, she clawed her way up to rank C. Then a string of missions went belly up, racked her with debt, and left her with no choice but to sign on for service. She couldn't believe it. She's a grown adventurer, so this should have made sense, but dwarves are short, and that's probably why she ended up like this. Martina leaned in and demanded to know exactly what was happening. She paused, then snapped her point clear. Her C-rank let her gather, plain and simple. She's a dwarf with a hammer in hand, and that strength of hers hits like a wrecking ball. Arthur clocked it right away. She had 0 confidence, and everything about her story felt sketchy as hell. Then she blurted out why she quit blacksmithing, and next thing you know, she started bombing missions. She admitted her fading vision was the culprit. She couldn't judge her gear anymore, and every time she tried to wipe out monsters, her shots kept slipping since all she could see was what sat right in front of her. Martina stared at the ground, her voice heavy with regret. No dwarf with that kind of vision could ever stand watch over Arthur. The hero's mind raced. Was this how the world decided to quit on people? Doubt gnawed at him as he started questioning everything about what the world truly valued. Then the boy stepped up to his mother and murmured a secret right into her ear. Mom leaned in and listened like her life depended on it, and Martina demanded, so what's it gonna cost to keep me up? But the man blurted, relax, we've got only 10 gold coins. He told her he was basically a useless servant. Only problem was that dwarves were almost extinct in this country, so the price was brutal, and Martina snapped, so how many years do I have to pay to be free? He didn't hesitate, 50 years straight. The catch was the alcohol every day. When the heroes heard it, they went still. She demanded 1 whole jug a day, or at minimum a single glass, and if they really had to, once a week. But that glass of ale cost 3 bronze coins, and suddenly the whole plan looked dead on arrival. The protagonist crunched the numbers and realized that paying once a week would barely total 7 gold coins in 50 years, and he called it a steal. The boy nodded like, once a week, yeah, that's probably fine. If she hadn't objected, she could have landed the role as Arthur's guard, so when the chance hit, her face lit up with pure joy, and she just froze, not knowing what to do. The dwarf only smiled and assured her, yeah, no problem at all. The heroes signed the contract and sealed the whole deal. Then Arthur leaned in and introduced himself to the girl again, grinning like he couldn't wait to meet her. The dwarf stepped forward, said her name was Lugina, and offered to serve right away. Though she admitted she hadn't tried it yet, she swore she'd happily work nights. The protagonist clocked it instantly. The dwarves were completely lost in their alcohol. Then Arthur's mother stepped forward and said her name was Martina, and her friend was Stefana, who proudly explained she served Baron Merlot like it was no big deal, and Arthur's jaw actually dropped when he realized Stefana was doing all that for someone that powerful. The very next day, the heroes hit the shops, racing to find fresh outfits for the evening reception. Lugina practically sparkled, grinning while she pored over the laws, grabbing new clothes and even a hammer, as the whole crew tried on designs, checking every detail and admiring the gorgeous flowers. They devoured those heavenly pastries and let the moment sink in. Then, once they'd bought outfits and the gear for Lugina, they finally pulled the trigger and decided to start. The protagonist's mother and Stefan headed out on errands, leaving the boy to tackle the glasses, and the young man steadied himself with fierce focus, grabbing paper and pen and getting to work. Lugina stared at her, and up close Arthur declared it. She had far-sighted eyes. When he couldn't examine them for real, he straight up built a bunch of concave lenses for her to try and see if they'd fix her vision. Next, the alchemical circle had to be drawn, and the young man slid into his seat at the table, boxed in by scattered papers, then scribbled down every option that could work. Gold, silver, and copper melted like butter inside the heating circle, but when he tried to melt iron, it just wouldn't budge, no matter how hard he pushed. So this heating circle had a hard temperature limit, and he started sweating over one question: what's quartz's melting point? It looked heat-proof, but he suspected it would still take a lot longer to finally break. First, he had to kick off the heating with one seal, and the young man knew something was wrong. The experiment was crashing, but he pushed on anyway. Then when he used two seals, everything melted perfectly, like it finally clicked. One seal blasted out a scorching 1000 degrees C, hot enough to melt copper, but the quartz still kept going, sizzling away between 1000 and 2000 degrees C, and the hero snapped into action, molding it and then forcing it to flow. Suddenly someone shouted from behind, and the boy jerked in fear. Lugina burst into view, gasping, totally lost about what was waiting ahead, and she demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Arthur stared at the factory-made lens, and the words just wouldn't come out. He apologized to the girl and shot her a question. Had she seen what he was doing? Lugina broke down and shouted that she had, demanding answers, yelling how anyone could have made a piece of glass like that. The young man just laughed, then started telling her everything from the very beginning. The boy spilled everything about materialization, the alchemical circle, and the truth of alchemy, how it all worked step by step, then asked Lugina if she was all right. She just stared, totally stunned and lost, before rushing up to Arthur and shaking him hard. The dwarf shrieked that this was totally unacceptable. She couldn't make heads or tails of what kind of alchemy this was, because she'd never even heard of materialization or any of this madness. The hero burst into laughter, then apologized on the spot, still sweating hard as he demanded why he worked like that. Lugina snapped back, swearing it was impossible, then started mumbling angrily under her breath. Finally, she screamed that she didn't understand a thing, completely stunned. Suddenly, a young man shouted from behind. She spun around, and he told her straight that the glasses he'd crafted had to stay secret from Stefana. The dwarf snapped back, insisting she knew he could do alchemy, and the hero told her his mom had drilled into him to keep it secret, just in case. He added that Stefana wasn't a spy, but sometimes it was safer for her not to find out, just to protect her, period. Lugina froze, then pressed the boy. Was Stefano trapped in some kind of trouble? He smirked, jabbed a finger at his desk full of the lenses, and told her there was nothing else. She had to try them on, and the girl agreed with a bright, happy grin. She pressed the lens to her eye and snapped into focus. Seeing everything so sharp, she gasped and cried out that it was real. Then she stared in awe, stunned she could even make out details at a distance. Back then, the boy's face was nothing but a blurry blur, but now she could spot every tiny feature sharp as day, and the dwarf practically exploded with joy. Arthur said he never thought it would hit that hard, then asked if the lenses would actually fit. She glanced out the window and confirmed she could see perfectly, and back in his old life that was normal, but here it felt unreal. Magic couldn't fix her failing vision, but he could still help through alchemy. He told her they had to keep pushing, and she nodded along. Their next job, forge a round frame, and to dodge nasty allergies, he chose silver instead of iron. The boy marched right back to his alchemy, and Lugina snatched up the glasses again. This time, they slid perfectly into place with frames that fit her size. The young man also crafted protective goggles, easy to tweak with a fabric strap, and built with a mesh design that kept the lenses from fogging up. These glasses were built for battle. She slid them on, checked her vision, and instantly knew she could see crystal clear and feel totally comfortable. She put it through its paces because during wild movement, glasses always slip off, so she started jumping and twisting around to force it, and somehow they never budged. Arthur explained that it all hinged on these glasses, then the dwarf snapped awake and bolted over to the boy. She shoved him right in front of her, and Lugina lit up with pure excitement, starting to repeat it all over again. Suddenly Arthur snapped his hand up and clobbered her on the head, barking at her to calm down. She flinched, then apologized, even though she was an adult and still packed a ton of strength. Then Arthur swung toward the dwarf and demanded to know if she had any idea about ovens. The girl beamed and shot back, of course we're gnomes, like it was the most obvious thing ever, and then she admitted they'd been learning to build ovens since they were kids. The hero couldn't shake the feeling she was hinting at someone specific, not just herself, so he pressed for answers, but she apologized, shrugged it off, and insisted she was just being herself. Then the young man told her she could say it however she wanted, and Lugina finally relaxed, said everything made sense, and thanked him. Martina and Stefana stormed back home out of nowhere, and the boy immediately spun toward his mother, greeting her like nothing happened. Then he blurted, "Where is Stefana?" Martina smiled and said, "She's out back prepping the tavern for Luzina's welcoming party." The heroes snapped to attention, because this ex-aristocrat was throwing a party for a servant, and that didn't make sense at all. Somehow, Martina had changed in all the years she'd spent with Stefana. Arthur shot a look at his mother, who was busy grabbing supplies for their little table. Martina spotted the glasses he kept mentioning, and he leaned in to explain they were protective goggles for combat. Then he tossed a normal pair onto the table and said the lens shape and thickness can completely change how someone sees. He even begged his mother, "Don't glare at me like that, you'll scare the life out of me." Martina begged to see the protective goggles, and the dwarf nodded. Then she started sliding them off her head. She marched the items over to her mother and begged her to hold them. Suddenly the protagonist spun around and snapped, "Lugina, don't put on your glasses yet." The young man spotted a red tint around the girl's eyes, and she waved it off as nothing. But Arthur snapped, warning her that keeping glasses on for too long could make it spiral worse. He was hunting for something softer than leather, but in this world, rubber was nowhere to be found. The girl asked straight up if koa wood could work, and the guy instantly remembered that this magic element even existed. The dwarf told him this metal was a forged staple, blended with a hardener to fine-tune its flex and slam down shock, so when the hero leaned in, he caught every last detail. Suddenly Martina barreled out from behind them and shouted that it was time to kick off the welcome party, then, along with Stefana, set up a huge table and called everyone over to eat, leaving Lugina and Arthur staring in amazement at what they saw. The four of them stared at the carefully laid table, then finally sat down and tore into the latest news, digging into those delicious dishes while Lugina took a small sip of her drink. She blurted that the beer finally tasted amazing again after a whole month, and the hero looked genuinely relieved for her. Then reality hit hard. Her mother was still wrecked from the hangover, and Stefana had to nurse her for 3 straight days. Lugina finally swung her gaze to Mr. Arthur, ready to tell him something. She asked if the glasses were really okay because she still wasn't used to this. No one knew they were there yet. Everyone mistook them for a mask and just stared her down. Then they stormed into the store and the salesman greeted them with a smile. "So what do you want this time?" he asked, but the moment he looked up, his face sharpened into sudden thought. The protagonist strode up and demanded 10 pieces of koa, plus the material and 1 full kilogram of hardener, and the seller snapped back by asking what in the world the young gentleman's dwarf was wearing on her face. The boy slipped the truth away as a secret, and the man burst into laughter, then dangled a candy if the kid would spill it. Arthur snapped that candy wasn't exactly a smart way to pay, and the salesman looked crushed and totally speechless, so he leaned in to the boys, apologized on the spot, and swore he'd grab everything they needed right away. Right then a whole wave of people burst through the door, and the salesman swooped in, handing each of them exactly what they came for. The store manager immediately apologized to Arthur for his employees' rude behavior. At first, the hero was totally lost, until the influential man pulled them aside and demanded they talk, pushing for the conference room, and Arthur shot back that they were just chopping. But the store manager snapped that they couldn't refuse, too noisy and it would look bad to just walk out with no reason, and our protagonist hesitated, unsure if he should negotiate, because deep down he was terrified that refusing would spark real force. Against his better judgment, he finally nodded, and the merchant practically lit up on the spot. They slipped into a cramped room and sat down as the man, Haspert, introduced himself as the owner of the Obsidian Merchant Guild's branch, and when the hero and Merlot said his name was Arthur, Lugina's jaw dropped when she finally clocked who he really was. Haspert kicked things off with a heartfelt apology and tossed them a few coins for the trouble, and they thanked him. Then the man leaned in and asked if the protagonist didn't mind to tell him about the mask and his companion, while Arthur reminded him that he'd already warned the employee to keep everything confidential. He clocked that girl was Lugina and demanded, "Is it really you?" And she shuddered like the truth hit a nerve. He demanded to know how he'd figured out her identity, and the salesman snapped back that it was literally his job. He'd heard about her terrible eyesight, so he never tried to approach her face to face. Arthur mulled it over for a second, and suddenly the whole thing clicked. Those glasses were likely silver and glass, and they could be replicated bit by bit over time, which explained why that mask had grabbed everyone's attention so fast. The hero flashed a thought about cashing this info in, then killed the idea, because why not enjoy himself for once? He grinned and told Lugenda, "Show me your new invention." The gnome yanked off her glasses, gave a quick nod, like "Yep, got it," then tossed them to Haspert. He scrutinized them, eyes widening at how wild and rare they were, and with zero hesitation he demanded, "Where do I get ones like these?" What? Arthur realized bragging that he'd done it himself would get laughed off, so he leaned in and told them the truth. These things weren't sold in stores. Haspert blinked in shock and demanded to know how he could get them, so the man twisted the story just a little to throw everything off. He claimed someone had made the things and brought them over, and he swore he wasn't trying to straight-up lie because he didn't want to face problems later. Haspert promised that if they handed him this craftsman, he'd slash their guild's prices by 10% across the board, but the young man pushed back, reminding them he'd vowed to keep the craftsman's name hidden, and the shopkeeper immediately clocked how badly everyone wanted that item. "Only one girl wears it," he asked if it felt strange. Then the air turned ominous in an instant, and the hero knew it was a threat. He clocked the danger and knew they'd need a clever escape route. Then the young man threw his head back and laughed. "Just send a request for a meeting. Simple." The seller nodded, saying it was perfect and had to hit the road ASAP, and the guy shot back, "Got it." Sometime later, the hero stayed put in the guild. Then the young man pushed himself up from his chair and declared, loud and clear, that they were heading back. Haspert grabbed his attention and told him to wait right there. He promised them, "I'll keep you safe on the way back," and just as he said it, two brutal, strong men stepped into the scene in front of the hero. "This world is wild, anything can strike at any moment, so you'd better stay sharp and cautious." Arthur got it and didn't argue. The guards demanded where they were headed, and the guy pointed them the way, left, then straight ahead. The moment that man's gun dug into his back, fear slammed into him, hard, because the hero couldn't let anyone trace where they were staying, not after what might come hunting them down, and he refused to go to desperate extremes. Before they knew it, they were standing right in front of Baron Merlot's mansion, and the guards stared at him like, why are you here?" Totally baffled. The young man strode up to the guard at the entrance, flashed a grin, and said, "Hey, I'm Arthur, Martina's son." The guard clocked him instantly and fired back a matching greeting. The hero clocked it. Those guards weren't about to budge. Then he blurted, "Since I'm home, everything's fine." He waved them off and shoved them out the door, and the guards trembled with pure indignation. The knight demanded why he'd even shown up, and Arthur fired back that he came because he needed Tobias's help. The boy burst into tears, yelling that his mother told him and Lugina to go on, but fear still clung to him, and he pleaded for them to bring his mother back fast, sobbing the truth as tears poured down his cheeks. The guard shot up in a flash and hollered that he'd check everything right now. Then he was told to stay put right there. Lugina leaned in and demanded to know what the hero planned to do next, and when he warned that without the Baron's family protecting them, trouble could hit hard, she couldn't miss it, he was weirdly calm. Arthur threw his hands up and said, "If showing fear of the unknown is what it takes, then fine, let's do it." In his eyes, the most dangerous move is letting everyone see that he can be pushed around. Alone, he stood no chance against a guild that size, so right then, he started racing through the worst-case scenarios. Knight crashed into them, huffing apologies for the delay. He swore he'd meet the hero later and ordered the carriage to grab Lady Martina. Then the protagonist steadied his breathing, pressed his hand to his chest, and finally calmed down. Lugina slipped up behind him and grinned. After a bit, Martina and Stefana charged up to him, screaming his name. He startled, then snapped back and shouted for his mother. She clung to him with a death grip, refusing to let go, and told him she'd heard he was at the Baron's mansion, so she'd been terrified. He swallowed his pride and apologized, admitting he never wanted to use a move like that, but he had run out of options. Mom clung to him tight, whispering, "Just know this, most important thing is you're safe." Out of nowhere, those words drove straight through Arthur's soul. He snapped around, and the young man crumbled, crying hard with tears pouring down his cheeks as he grabbed the hem of his mother's dress. The girl pulled him into a hug, raked her fingers through his hair, and promised him everything was okay, while the boy admitted he just couldn't do anything. He felt utterly helpless. Later, the heroes ended up crammed inside a huge gazebo, and they finally spilled their feelings, until the young man turned to his mother and demanded, "Is everything okay?" Stefana and Lugina stood on the sidelines, watching as Arthur clutched his mom and blurted out just how ashamed he felt. He tried to scramble down fast, but his mother snapped, "Stay close, times like this don't need you to be strong." The boy nodded and agreed. He kicked off with the whole story of the day, laying out what happened, then made it clear he didn't come here just to hide behind protection, and Martino was completely thrown. He wanted full rights to the info on those glasses, but the trade guild couldn't be trusted. Every deal felt like a trap. Thanks to his mother's hookups with Rosanna, they'd finally get a hearing at least. The young man leaned in and asked what she really thought of the people from the House of Defense. Then she froze, weighing every word. She decided the Baron was old school, not bull-headed. His wife played perfect model wife and mother. Tobias carried himself with a way too serious calm and trusted everyone too easily. And Rosanna, at least according to Martina, was fair-minded and deadly skilled in martial arts. The young man figured they could finally spill everything to Tobias, but his mother snapped back, saying they had no choice. Then they sealed the deal by hooking their little fingers together, and Arthur begged her, "Please don't expose my alchemy mastery." What? Tobias apologized, and the mother and son bowed with real gratitude for meeting him. He told them he'd heard about something strange. Martinez grinned and said they should make the strangers step out before anything kicked off. Tobias leaned in and demanded to know if she trusted his servants. The woman said it was all business, then leaned in and asked the gentleman if he'd accept the blame if their information ever leaked, because, yeah, this world has no patents. He broke into a cold sweat, but something in him relented, and he agreed. Tobias weighed the money in his head and asked the girl straight up if she even understood what was going on back at her home. Martina didn't get the question, so she blurted, "Wait, what?" and asked again. The young man paused, then his mind suddenly exploded with an answer. He shot an apology to the guests and begged them to wipe the slate clean of everything he'd said earlier. Martina snapped that no more talking could happen until they faced the baronial house's status. The young man demanded the exact funds. The girl warned that worst case meant up to 80 platinum coins, and Tobias stood up. He frowned hard and, while apologizing, admitted that 80 coins were totally out of reach. Martina hurried over, soothed him, and swore this was the absolute max, because 40 was usually more than enough. The Baron stared at the number 40 while the protagonist snapped, "I'm ready for 40 platinum coins," and then swore he couldn't cover his real intentions. Tobias threw his hands up and demanded to know how long it would take to get his investment back if he went in with 80. Martina shot back that the best case meant 3 years, but the worst case was just 5, and the man nearly stumbled when he realized it was all going to happen that fast. Arthur shot back that it smelled like a scam. He said that a glass furnace would take 6 months to a year to build, and on top of that, they'd need workers sworn to secrecy about every technical detail. Tobias leaned in and asked the price, 40 coins. The girl shook her head and said they couldn't spare a glass furnace for that. He froze for a beat, then asked if a simple workshop would do. Martina looked right at him and asked, "Do you even have one?" During the capital's expansion, the hero told him they'd left an abandoned glass workshop behind, cracked, ruined, and still needing repairs. He took a sip of tea and leaned in, asking what kind of glass places were around the city. The man grinned and said there was one that specialized in making window glass. Martina figured out that if that was the deal, 40 platinum coins would cover it, and they wouldn't clash as competitors, period. Tobias then shot back, asking what he'd get, and Martina told him it'd be his cut from the profits based on the intel he was bringing. They still had to pull a letter of recommendation for the aristocratic academy. Tobias stared at the recommendation letter and started to push back. Then Martina cut in fast, saying her son wanted to choose that university for himself, and his parents had to back his dreams. He told them he couldn't make a call like that by himself and had to talk to his father. Then he snapped his gaze to the heroes and demanded they wait, rose from his chair, and stormed out of the room. The door slammed shut behind him, and Martina spun toward her son, then demanded his take on everything that was blowing up around them. The young man clocked that Tobias wasn't reacting badly, but the whole baronial mess smelled worse by the second. He figured it was money trouble, even with the taxes already paid, because the Baron kept ranting about some looming problem. Rosanna disappeared again, and Tobias wasn't around either. He was gone yesterday, too. Martina realized that every single thing now hinged on the Baron's decision. The kid said they hadn't spilled any real key info yet, so a refusal wouldn't sting too much. Then he leaned in and warned that for everyone's safety, the baronial house needed to take over the situation. Tobias came back, still rushing apologies for the delay, and told him he'd brought his father along to pick up where they left off. The Baron snapped at Tobias to rein it in, because Tobias was getting way too cozy during the negotiations. Then he immediately apologized. Arthur just stepped back in, and straight away, someone started ripping him a new one. Martina shot out an apology, then snapped that they were once again stealing the gentleman's precious time, and he admitted he never thought they'd run into him again the very next day after the last one. The man stared down the boy and demanded he explain, right there, why a child was even at the negotiations. Martina warned the Baron that the kid was in real danger. He didn't get it at first, but Stefana's words left no doubt. Right then, she started pouring tea, and from somewhere behind them, you could hear people saying the whole thing was a long, twisted story. Martina spilled the whole story, and Tobias figured it could be a warning or a sneaky safety tip, but either way, there was nothing they could do with it. Arthur fired back. This was the real truth. No crimes had been committed, the guards were still just doing their jobs, and the threat was nothing more than the young man's own warped perception. Martina clutched her chest and swore nothing had to be done, but if guilds were really spouting claims like that, they couldn't be trusted, so they handed the whole mess off to someone else. The Baron asked if they could switch over to another guild, and the girl hesitated. Yeah, maybe he was right, but fear of betrayal had them choosing to trust their own, because she swore they were the safer, more reliable bet. Arthur realized his mother had been amazing, laying it all out perfectly. Then the gentleman nodded like he had every detail locked in, and even said glass was involved too, but Arthur still couldn't figure out how it all actually worked or what the real specifics were. The girl halted, then laid it all out like wine glasses, and said the quartz ones mixed with impurities came out foggy and trashy, costing just 5 silver coins. Quartz shards turned into slightly pale glasses, priced just right, 2 coins for the pair. And those goblets crafted from pure quartz, the top grade, could fetch 5 gold coins, but with that knowledge you could forge the same kind of goblet for under 1 coin. The Baron and his son lit up, grinning like Christmas just arrived. Martina broke it down. First, they had to start making transparent glass blanks from quartz sand, and once those blanks were ready, they'd sell them to other glass workshops as raw material. The heroes burst out in shock, staring at the glass and wondering if they'd really have to turn it into finished products all by themselves. She said the safest move was to kick off production only after clear glass was everywhere, and when he asked if it was to dodge hostility, she snapped back, yes. They gambled on the guild's wrath, could wipe out the local glassworks and set the locals off, and once clear glass finally became normal, every other workshop could crank out top-tier stuff for cheap. But now the talk had nothing to do with glass, just one more looming problem. The Baron leaned in and asked, "Is there anything else?" The girl spun toward Lucina, and the gnome yanked off her glasses, then said they weren't just for show, they were vision correction tools. They needed glass that was both cheap and top-notch. Arthur nodded and warned that pricey glasses would be useless, since almost nobody could actually afford them. His mother nodded and confirmed it was real, plus she pointed out that lenses show up in way more than just glasses. The Baron leaned back in his chair, a smug grin spreading as he declared, "Everything's crystal clear to me now." He scratched his forehead and smiled. Yeah, that felt right. The guy warned it wouldn't work out instantly, but he still stepped up, ready to pay 40 platinum coins and take the job. Then the contract question blew up, and they decided to split the profits first. Martina insisted that a clean 10% of the profits would be more than enough, and the Baron blinked in shock at her generosity, asking if she really meant it, if she'd truly be satisfied with those terms. She nodded, but then she lined in and dropped one more condition. She demanded the right to use the Helbendorp forge, and she made it clear she wanted to ask Stefana too. The man said the forge was easy, but he couldn't wrap his head around why the girl needed a friend, so he turned to Mrs. Martina and asked if she knew what was going on with Stefana. She shook her head, but the Baron leaned in and laid it out. Stefana had been a lifelong criminal servant. Hearing that, Martina's jaw dropped and her eyes went wide. She snapped her head down and absorbed the info like it hit her gut. Turns out there were 3 categories of criminal servants. For small crimes like stealing and petty harm, the court slapped down a sentence that ranged from 3 to 10 years. Reckless manslaughter and serious injury landed people in the ring for 10 to 30 years. The punishment was brutal. Then came premeditated murder. That wasn't a sentence, it was a life term of hard labor. They snapped up disposable servants for jobs where death was basically the price of admission, but Stefano was the one exception, treated like he mattered. Martina snapped her gaze to the gentleman, baffled by what just happened, and the man only shrugged, saying it was basically pity. He spun to Stefana and said she might not feel like talking, but she still needed to. Then Martina snapped back that there was no point in pushing her. The Baron snapped that if she wanted him to keep her close, she'd better learn the whole truth. She listened, dropped her gaze, and then boom, she knew he was right. A loud knock hit the door, and the girl shot up off the sofa. She stomped her heels on the floor, snatched up Stefan, and declared she could still make it after leaving the Viscount's house. Sure, she had money and a smart son, but the truth was brutal. She couldn't cook a thing or wash a single day. Her friends showed her how to tackle household chores and jumped in to help with the field work, too. As a security guard, she didn't have to survive all that chaos, yet somehow, a warm, friendly bond formed between them, bright and real. She fought the urge to pry into Stefana's past because she knew Stefana would eventually go back to her master. But the moment she met Stefana, gratitude hit hard and something warm, almost family-like, clicked in her chest. And if Stefana hadn't shut it down, Martina would have been thrilled to finally hear Stefana's story. The girl spoke her mistress's name, dropped her gaze, sighed once, and then kicked off her story. Her dad was an adventurer, and her mom worked as a registrar at the guild. In their family, it was just her, plus her mother, her father, and her younger sister. Philomena and Stefan's parents begged them to slow down, don't sprint. The girls nodded like they understood too. They weren't wealthy at all, but back then their days were stuffed with pure happiness. Then one day they got hit with terrible news. Her husband vanished from the house, and the shock made the dishes slip from her hands and shatter on the floor. Stefana's father threw a party that was supposed to feel unstoppable, heart and hearty, everyone called it, and then he and the whole crew just vanished without a trace. With the mission collapsing, people all but wrote them off as dead, and after that, Stefana's mother fought tooth and nail to keep working and raise her daughters. But then illness crushed her, day by day. It only got worse, until the family finally couldn't even scrape together the money for medicinal potions. At 13, she dove headfirst into adventuring, but it still couldn't stop her mom's illness, and by the time she turned 15, her mother was gone. Her sister leaned in and demanded she listen, because at just 15, Philomena was already working as a saleswoman, and she poured out her heart. She dreamed of marrying and building their stores side by side, then repaying her sister for everything she'd done. Back then, Philomena was dating the shop owner's son, so when Stefana said she didn't need to pay him back, she meant it. Just being together was all she wanted, and it made her feel completely safe, until that kind of happiness was stolen one day. 6 months later, the guards showed up at their doorstep and demanded to know if that place belonged to Philomena. The heroine yanked the door open, confirmed it was hers, and asked why they were there. Then she froze in shock at seeing them standing right in front of her. She got hit with the devastating news about what happened to her sister the day before. Philomena was dragged out of the slums, bruised and battered after some brutal attack, so Stefner tore into the slums too, swearing to herself it had to be a lie. She kept saying it, legs burning and lungs gasping from that sprint. And it turned out to be real, every terrifying detail. The heroine stared at her dead sister, laid out with flowers, and her mind just couldn't make sense of it, like she'd lost the ability to even react. Stefano couldn't wrap his head around it. Why in the world was Philomena the one getting blamed? She slipped to her sister's grave and tucked fresh flowers at the headstone. Then the case was stamped shut. Everyone convinced her sister wandered into the slums alone, and the monster who did it was never caught. But this felt way too strange. Philomena would never, ever wander there alone, especially not when even Stefana was too scared to go by herself. Something didn't add up, so she grabbed a sword, threw on a cloak, and marched into the guild. Then one of the boys spotted her. The heroine went straight into the slums to snatch an informant, slid over a bag of coins, and asked for results. Then the pipe-smoking thug leaned in and bragged he was a mercenary for small, messy love problems, before showing her a portrait. They swore he was peddling uniforms from a slum shop, and the moment Stefano spotted the offender, fury slammed into him, because Philomena could have gotten hurt. But when the slum residents testified, nobody listened, and the mercenaries' boss walked away untouched. He leaned in and said this wasn't the whole story, then dropped the bomb that Philomena was pregnant. Hearing that, the main character froze in shock, completely lost on what to do next. Late at night, a dude sprawled in his store chair, leaned back with a heavy sigh, and muttered that he wanted more fun, until he remembered solving the case would land him in hot water, and he snapped at Philomena for being too stupid to realize she'd been played. Right then, bam, a knock rattled the door, and the boy's stomach dropped as he wondered who would show up at that hour. He swung it open and demanded who wanted him, only to find a girl in a cloak standing right there on the threshold. Stefana pressed a knife to his throat and demanded the truth. She promised she'd kill him the second he lied. The worker admitted the man already had a fiancée, yet Philomena became his toy, and when she got pregnant, she stumbled into a trap, and he teamed up with his father to trick his own sister into the slums, and that's where he took her life, and with the slums laws on his side, they couldn't convict him. The heroine swallowed her tears and told Martin everything, sadly but straight from the heart. She released his hands and then she spit out the truth. That's exactly why she'd slaughtered everyone herself. Right then, the past came crashing back into her mind. Martina snapped, "Do you regret your revenge?" The girl stared at the ground and shook her head, no. As for whether it was truly the right move, she had no answer yet. His mother shut it down and called it finished. No point in answers, and revenge wasn't justice or pure evil, just another way to dodge the truth. You can't escape responsibility for what you do. Martina thrust out her hand and begged the heroine to stay, and when Stephanie met her gaze, her eyes instantly brimmed with tears. So moved by that kindness and respect, she nodded and agreed. The Baron clocked what was happening, declared that it was all settled, and handed the news straight to Stefan Martina. Then Martina shot him a grateful thanks. Arthur told her the heroine couldn't be freed from service, but he still swore they'd end up as a real, tight-knit family. Everyone took their seats across from the Baron. Until that glass business really kicks off, he's stepping in, covering every loss to make sure they don't get burned. While they stayed in the provincial capital, they were even granted the mansion to live in. Protection was the mission, and they nailed it, filling their hearts with pure, unstoppable jubilation. The Baron leaned in and said, "First things first, we've got to track down a glassmaker and an alchemist inside the guild." Martina took over recruiting the crew, then reminded everyone that more still had to get done. Right then, the hero's mother marched up to Lugina and demanded she inspect the glass furnace in the workshop, and Lugina nodded and agreed. An alchemist had to pick out the alchemical tools and get ready to test that furnace. Then out of nowhere, Lugina snapped with a sour, annoyed cry. Everyone froze, stared at her, and turned their attention her way. The bespectacled girl shot out an apologetic glance, mortified as her stomach growled, because she remembered the maid had promised she'd start dinner. The gentleman shot to his feet and declared that from now on, he wanted Tobias to step up and take the lead, because if it all worked out, it would crank Tobias's confidence way up. To dodge any disaster, he kept going, naming Sebiance as his assistant, the head butler who could handle the job without breaking a sweat, and the girl nodded, saying she got it. Tomorrow, one squad is heading straight for the Slave Guild, while the other heroes are rushing to the Obsidio Guild to shut down their offer and refuse them cold. So the Lord called in Dieterich, the baronial night guard, and ordered him to keep watch over them, warning the guild that if they didn't back off, he'd handle it personally. The girl heard his speech, froze for a beat, and then said, "All right in that case." She spun toward Arthur and snapped, "You'll run tomorrow's negotiations, so finish this and let's go." His mother's words hit him like a punch, fear flooding his chest. He jerked and the tea mug slipped from his hands, crashing to the floor as he screamed, terrified to face the truth. Did he really have to talk? Martina spun toward him, slid her hands onto his shoulders, and told him, "This is an experience for you too, I've got you. Even if it goes sideways, Mr. Baron will step in, so don't freak out. Just take a shot and try." Arthur shot back, awkward but honest, that he understood her. Then Mrs. Tina leaned in and said she had a question for Mr. Baron, and he turned to her, asking what it was. The girl confessed that yesterday she sensed a wild, frantic energy creeping through the mansion. She leaned in and demanded he tell her one thing: something serious was unfolding, and she needed to know right now. She's freaking out because Rosanna, stuck raising the kid, has disappeared for days. She stared straight into Mr. Baron's eyes, and he smirked back like he already knew it wasn't just curiosity. She nailed every detail, and the truth would surface eventually, so the Baron decided to cut to it and spill the full story right now, before anyone else could. The gentleman leaned in and told me how, just a few days back, Helbendorp got wiped out by a ruthless pack of monsters. Mr. Arthur froze at her words, and she pressed them again. Could it really be Helbendorp? The hero snapped back to it. This village was the launching point for carving a road straight through the forest. The Baron kept insisting the wall wasn't finished yet and couldn't be held, so Rosanna snapped into action and went after the pack that had struck that wall. The boy paused, then blurted out, "So how strong is Rosanna?" And his mother smiled, saying she was about as strong as a royal guard. The hero's eyes flared with disbelief as Rosanna's raw strength hit him like a punch. And Mr. Baron doubled down just to be safe. He'd also brought in a few squads of adventurers, because when it comes to surviving the forest, they handle it way better. Martina figured this had to be why the money was running dry. He nodded, took her words to heart, and said wiping out those monsters and saving the village was going to cost a fortune. Arthur weighed it all in his head, feeling crushed for the ruined village, but deep down, he knew the truth was obvious. The girl popped to her feet and said, "Then we're going all out, let's kick off the glass workshop ASAP." Martina and Baron grabbed each other's hands and locked in a handshake. The heroes strode over to the table, and Mistress Tina spun toward Lugina and Fauna, standing right beside her, and declared that they'd be eating with them from now on, leaving the two slaves utterly stunned. Then Martina started breaking down every little detail, because that only happens with a proper family of four, and yeah, eating separately was a waste of time when food is supposed to be a family affair, so she patted the seat beside her and told her to sit right there. The two heroines nodded, saying they finally understood her. Everyone dropped into their seats around the table. After dinner, Mr. Arthur patted his full stomach and declared, "I'm stuffed, now it's time to sharpen my defenses." The boy gripped that squishy, gel-like stuff in his hands and demanded to know if it could soak up shock, and the girl dove in. Yeah, it was a magical stone, and no, it didn't move slow, so that's why it was called Koa. Lugina's gear coating was rock hard, and for glasses pressed right up against the face, foam rubber was the perfect choice. The hero pressed Lugina for the mix of Koa and hardener, and she snapped back. For the Koa, it's 10 grams of Koa material and 3 grams of hardener. Mr. Arthur said he wanted the mix softer, so he'd go with a 10-to-2 ratio, then he started tossing in wheat grains. Lugina shot back, "Why are you adding that?" The hero smirked and said it was a total surprise, and that she'd understand everything when she saw it for herself later. 5 minutes later, the hero's heart sank. He finally understood the mission was a total failure. He told me he mashed together materialized wheat grains with Koa and the material, then hardened it, only to pull the grains out and leave cavities behind, but the whole thing came out way too loose. Arthur asked the girl if he had the right firmness, and she shot back that it felt way too soft. Then the hero grinned and told her, "It's meant to be like that. If it's too hard, the skin would start rubbing and get wrecked." This time the boy ditched the wheat and poured in sesame seeds instead. He cracked a grin at the outcome and knew, no doubt, that he'd nailed it. Smiling, he declared, "From now on it's called foamed Koa," but the girl cut in, pointing out there weren't any bubbles. He shrugged it off and said he'd planned it that way, for the atmosphere. The heroes swapped out Lugina's glasses, and Lugina shot back, "How do you think I feel? They never slip even when I move." Arthur grinned and said they'd put the glasses through their paces, then tweak the regular ones too. Arthur tore the glasses down to pieces, rebuilt them with alchemy so they snapped shut on hinges, and swapped the fresh pads for a tougher coal leaf lining instead of plain grass. He also backed up the glasses by gluing the exact Koa sheet inside the cover, so now they fit snug and feel comfortable to wear. She stared at the gentleman and said a jeweler wasn't even necessary, and he snapped back that alchemy can't forge a knife. She pressed him again, so tell her straight was making knives with alchemy truly impossible. He didn't sugarcoat it. You can mold the asterisk shape of a knife, but you can't conjure a real blade. And since you can't force the details past a certain limit, the end result never comes out sharp. Lugina leaned in and asked the gentleman if alchemy truly couldn't sharpen a knife. He smirked and said the method was cutting, not the usual grinding you do to sharpen it. Turns out Mr. Arthur only knows 10 techniques from that book. He can heat, cool, compress, mold, cut, synthesize, extract, purify, separate, and even age them. The hero decided to hunt for new techniques later, but right now he leaned in and begged Lugina to tell him everything about metals. The very next day, Mr. Arthur stormed into the store, and a man greeted him right away. Mr. Arthur spotted the very same salesman waiting in front of him again. Ono greeted him right back and shot a question. "Is Heisberg still here?" They promised they'd call him right now, then made him wait in the meeting room. Just when it felt like forever, a mustached man finally stepped into the room, slid into the seat across from the heroes, and burst out an apology for making them wait. Tina and her son nodded at the gentleman sitting opposite them, and he stared at Arthur like he was weighing something in his mind. He suddenly blurted out, "Wait, are you the one who made those glasses?" Heisberg blinked in shock at her beauty, and Arthur shot back, "That's my dear mother." The gentleman bowed his head, apologized, and then tossed out a wild guess. Maybe his father was a dwarf. The boy couldn't make sense of what the man was saying, and he kept replaying every word as he wondered why his father was a dwarf. Tina stood her ground for him and snapped back that this kid had not a single drop of dwarven blood in him. Heisberg froze in panic, apologized again, then swore he'd spoken so polished and courteous that the gentleman mistook him for a half-gnome. Arthur couldn't stop thinking about it because his past life memories wouldn't let him. His body looked one way, but his soul felt totally different, and it drove him crazy asking, "Do I really look weird in everyone else's eyes?" Right then he threw his old thoughts to the wind and snapped to his senses. No, he couldn't let this rattle him, not when he had to make his mother happy. The hero snapped back, "I'm giving Heisberg the answer to yesterday's question." And with Mr. Baron Merlot now holding the info about the glasses, he finally had the power to go straight to the baronial house and pry into every last question. The iceberg snapped back, "Wasn't it you who kicked off this talk? Even a grand baronial house can't just pretend it didn't happen." Mr. Arthur kept insisting that Heisberg first ask to be introduced to the creator. Then the boy snapped back that he'd pass along the message to the gentleman in front of him, and that everything the hero just said was the exact answer. The man pressed the same question again, when could negotiations start, and demanded they get moving right now, but the hero just couldn't figure out what on earth those negotiations were supposed to be. Heisberg stared at the guy in front of him, shocked. then blurted out that yeah, obviously, he meant the negotiations to sell the manufacturing method. Arthur reveled in the man's rising panic, then immediately wondered in his own head, did Heisberg finally clock his mistake? The hero shot back, I was only told to present it, not handed the details of the negotiations, and if he truly wanted that manufacturing method, he'd have said so up front, then snapped up the right to negotiate himself, cutting everyone else out. The man dug in his heels and snapped that they could have hauled in way more profit. The boy shot back that money wasn't even in the same universe as what mattered, and he wanted Heisberg to get that. Then the man nodded, weighed the kid's words and agreed, saying he'd give in just this once. The hero backed that brilliant choice, and then Heisberg turned to the gentleman and demanded he tell the Baron he's ready to step in with whatever trouble hits, and the hero swore he'd carry that message straight to him. Arthur couldn't wipe the grin off his face. This deal felt perfect, because with it, they wouldn't dare move openly anymore, and that was pure gold for him. But Heisberg still couldn't shake the feeling that her son couldn't possibly have zero dwarven blood. He leaned in and demanded to know how old Mr. Arthur really was. The boy shot back, I'm Arthur and I'm 5 years old. Arthur and the other heroes trudged along together when he fidgeted and asked how it was going. Then they said, flat out, that someone was tailing them. 3 cloaked men kept their eyes on them, and the man muttered that he felt zero hostility coming from the one stalking behind. Arthur realized Dietrich didn't just suggest a safety detour, he was planning the whole escape. But this guard knight is insanely competent, like the real deal. The girl demanded whether the people chasing them would ever quit, and they snapped back that even they couldn't say for sure those were actually guild members. In a world where patents don't exist, morals get swallowed whole, and if someone rips off or steals your information, don't go begging for sympathy. Arthur decided the only way to survive was to guard that information ourselves, no matter what it took. Edric spun toward the guy beside him and demanded what to do if those people kept tailing them. Then the boy shot back that the moment they spotted the glasses, they'd know it was plain glass right away. The hero decided to waste no time. He dashed straight to the glass workshop and demanded the guard escort them there. The heroes burst into the workshop, and Tina's eyes immediately caught how oddly empty the whole place felt. Arthur spotted a pair of kids lurking around the corner. That guard knight clocked the gentleman's stare and snapped a warning. Those kids were likely fresh from an orphanage. Mr. Baron backs these kids with everything he's got, but because the orphanages are tax-exempt, his over-the-top help sparks serious backlash. Commoners pay the poll tax, and if you're over 5 years old, you don't get to dodge it, you have to pay. But the kids from that orphanage don't have money like that, period. By the time they're 9, they're stuck helping in the orphanage, and at 10 they're thrown into work. Then by 13 they're forced to save every coin and vanish from that place. Turns out they've got almost no jobs left. Dietrich cuts in mid-thought and snaps that most of them end up as low-class adventurers or straight-up bandits. Arthur kept thinking he could have ended up just like them. If his mother had ditched him back then, he'd have grown into the same kind of child. The heroes promised to slip into the workshop and check it from the inside. They shoved Dietrich outside to keep watch, and he shot back that they could count on him. Then they ordered Lugano to check the stove. Tina told them to speak up the moment something felt off, and the heroes pushed inside. Arthur's mother said the building was solid enough to run a little shop right there, and Arthur shot back that they couldn't risk anyone stepping inside if they wanted to keep the information safe. He explained that this workshop is strictly for production, and that the sales can happen anywhere else. He crunched the numbers and laid out a plan that made it crystal clear. This building has to be rebuilt, because the exits are a mess and everyone can see the work going on, so the hero pushes to slam up new walls and add magical ventilation devices. Lugina cut the boy off on the spot, insisting the oven was running perfectly, and he snapped back that meant they could head straight back to the Baron's mansion and report it. The heroes marched back to the mansion, only to find a man waiting in the room with the Baron, like he'd been there the whole time. He dropped a real apology for calling the heroes the second they came back, but before any of that, they had to explain what was going on in this exact room. The heroes leaned in, eyes locked on him like they couldn't wait for the next move. The man declared they built this room just for glass-making secrets, since it used to be a shelter, and every inch was already reinforced to keep intruders out. 3 tiny rooms sat there, ready for sleep, and the cleaning was already done. Mr. Arthur just couldn't believe how fast they had worked. The gentleman said only him and the Sebians hold the key to that room, so without them, nobody gets inside. Tina shot a question. This was a former shelter, right? Doesn't that mean there's gotta be a secret entrance or exit? And he answered, the one the heroes came in through, that's the secret. The real main entrance has been sealed for ages. The girl flat out said they had nothing to worry about, and the Baron lit up because they'd liked everything. while Arthur couldn't shake the feeling it looked just like a secret base. Now the Baron lined in, ready to hear the hero's report. Tina kicked off the tale with the Obsidio Guild, and sure, they finally backed down, but it feels like they didn't surrender for real. The girl blurted that someone was tailing them, so the Baron instantly understood the grim truth. This wasn't over, they were still sniffing for answers, and they'd better stay on guard. Because surveillance was everywhere, she said they had no choice but to cook up a plan and rebuild the glass workshop to stop any information from leaking out. Tina admitted she wasn't sure the plan would work, but she still begged him to go over it. Then Baron promised he'd review every single one of their ideas for sure. After studying the drawings, the gentleman leaned in and declared the whole plan was brilliant, tight, clear, and perfectly laid out. He said that now the only thing left was figuring out how to recruit everyone. Yeah, they'd already found an alchemist, but there was still no glacier in sight. Arthur breaks it down. They're pulling the operational staff from people tied to the baronal house, assistants, and even the general manager who runs operations, but the master craftsmen, those legends are way harder to track down. The barons warned if we can't stay in the province, we'll have to hunt beyond it, and that could take ages. The hero shot back that there was nothing he could fix, so he'd just have to sit tight and wait, because those masters mattered. That gentleman snapped, saying it was just a matter of the moment, then turned to his servant Sibians and asked if there was anything else he wanted to add. With the Baron's permission, he shot back that he wanted to ask a simple question. Wouldn't it be smarter to start training alchemists? The Baron shot back, sure, it sounds simple on paper, but who am I supposed to teach, huh? There aren't any kids left to start from zero. The Sibians stepped up and offered to raise and educate the orphans themselves. The gentleman pressed him again, so you really want to train orphans to become alchemists? But Sabian hesitated, not even sure where his own conviction stood. He said they were still kids, so they could be trained, and maybe, just maybe, they'd pull off becoming alchemists. The boy couldn't stop wondering if those orphans had what it takes to learn alchemy, or if the truth would stay hidden. The Baron decided this theory was testable, training would crank up their magical power, and learning letters and arithmetic would help them later, even if they never became alchemists. The hero decided it was time to shut this down for today, and the gentleman admitted that since yesterday, all he'd done was sit there thinking. Now he was completely wiped out. 2 days blew past in a blink. Lugina, clutching everything she's holding, lines in and fires a question at Arthur. What's better? He stares at the girl with zero spark in his eyes, then refuses to say a word. The hero blurts that even though he's Lugina's boss, he totally spaced and forgot to buy her underwear. Then he rushes to apologize to the girl. So today they rushed in to grab groceries for Lugina. But Mr. Arthur refuses to accept what the stores try to sell him. Then he shot Lugina a question. Was there some special fabric that could stretch and snap back? She just echoed his words back at him. The girl snapped back that the fabric was nothing but threads, and threads on their own can't stretch or shrink, so that kind of fabric just didn't exist. Still, she wouldn't stop. She kept pressing the boy, demanding which of the two was truly better. Arthur jabbed at the shorts and the girl's face crumpled. His answer had hit a nerve. Right after that, his mother swept over with 2 skirts and demanded, "Tell me which one looks better." Lugina watched the boy and Martina from the sidelines, then he snapped back that the second skirt's color was the better pick, because bright colors hit harder and draw people in. The girl seethed at her master, then when he demanded to know what happened, she snapped back that nothing at all had happened. After they finished shopping, Tina leaned in and warned Arthur that next time he'd be handling his own errands, and the card she handed him was all his, with every cent under his control. The boy grinned, thanked her, and blurted, "How much is in it?" Tina smiled back and said it had 1 white silver coin. Arthur's jaw hit the floor. 1 white silver coin was worth a staggering 6 million yen, and that kind of money was something he could handle with zero sweat. Tina added that the child support was its own thing, so he didn't have to sweat it, yet Arthur still couldn't wrap his head around how much money that Marquis was handing him. He'd labeled the Marquis a ruthless monster in his own head, but the truth hit like a shockwave. It wasn't that at all. And then the real question snapped in. Why had he judged a man he'd never even met? They tore the old mess down and rebuilt the glass workshop from the ground up. The man snapped back to Arthur that the soundproofing koa worked so perfectly. During a normal conversation, nothing could be heard from outside at all. But if you shout, you can catch the man's words for a second, then it slips away into silence. Arthur thanked him and immediately asked how thick the coal sheet they used for the experiment was. He said the thinnest you can go is 5, because if you slap a 10-thick coal sheet on the walls and ceiling, it buckles, peels, and rips under its own weight, and Arthur immediately saw that as a real problem. But if that thin sheet usually keeps you from getting what they're saying, then this should be more than enough. In his head, he kept circling back like, after all this, what matters most? Elastic fabric, cold-treated metal, a whole list of ideas. There were endless things to dig into. Tina shot over to Arthur and blurted that Tobias said Rose would be back today. She said she might already be waiting there by the time they swung back around. Arthur remembered Rosanna was a wizard of body enhancement magic, and the moment she swung that massive sword, cutting through every enemy like they weren't even there, people started calling her by an unforgettable nickname. Rose flew down the stairs in front of them, smiling at her sister Tina, and yeah, everybody called her the little princess spirit killer. The heroes clinked their glasses side by side, celebrating like they just survived the impossible. They all crowded around the table, shoulder to shoulder. Arthur's nerves jittered as he sat at the table with the other aristocrats, even with his mother's manners drilled into him. Next to him sat the head of the Tunisian baronial house, snapping that full drop had been grinding his nerves, yet the glass-making business at least meant restoration wasn't dead anymore. The hero pretty much knew everyone already, but when the whole family finally gathered, he got a proper introduction. Tunis and Juliana were the elders, Tobias ruled as the older brother, Hurt was the younger, Rosanna stood at Tobias' side as his wife, and Marnix was their second son. In the baronial family, 6 people packed the room. Then Tunis lined in and demanded, "Martina, why are you trying to send Arthur to the academy?" The girl said Arthur was the one who demanded it. He wanted to learn alchemy himself. Tunisia shot back that alchemy demands more than just the water attribute, and Tina fired right over it, claiming the alchemy books never once said you needed any extra attributes. You don't just need asterisk them to build alchemical lands. Alchemy can run wild on its own, no extras required. Tunisia asked whether it was written in the alchemy book too, and the girl just shrugged and left it to the man's imagination. Arthur clocked that she was dodging the question, but the truth was way simpler. He just assumed there were no attributes listed in alchemy recipes. Arthur's mother kept insisting that Al's missing attributes didn't mean he was powerless. She was dead serious that Al was going to grow into an incredible alchemist. Tina's words lit a fire under her sister. She shot up on her feet and swore she'd raise Marl into a swordsman who'd blow past her one day. After they finished dinner, the servants wiped down the tables, and just then a man strode into the room, bowed to them, introduced himself, and said his name was Rambo. Martina leaned in, introduced herself to the guest, and told him to grab a seat with them at the table. Rumba's jaw dropped when she made her proposal. She hadn't expected it to hit like that. Once again, the Baron's household head barked for him to sit, just like Martina had allowed, so the boy swallowed hard and said he understood. He awkwardly plopped down beside the other heroes. Rambo trained in the alchemy department of the Noble Academy, until the next moment he got sold to a slave guild, and Arthur heard the deal was downright tangled. Martina kicked things off by saying she wanted to dig into the alchemist's role in glassmaking, and then connect it straight to Rambo's skills. She leaned in and grilled the boy about what an alchemist really does in glassmaking. Then he flashed a grin and swore he understood every single bit of it. The plan was to purify liquid glass and then bend it into a lens. Yep, she agreed without hesitation, and then she leaned in and asked if he had any questions or ideas. Rambo paused for a beat, then finally forced the words out. Tunisia told the guy to say what he really thought, like, if he had something to say, there was no reason to hold it back. He told the other heroes the truth. He thought this job was humiliating for an alchemist. Martina leaned in and demanded to know what the heck was wrong. The alchemist snapped, saying that if it was only about refining and shaping, anyone at copper rank, someone who didn't even call themselves an alchemist, could do it. Arthur shot back, so what does copper rank mean? Then they told him the alchemy department runs on ranks copper, silver, and gold, and the only way to earn a completion diploma is to collect every single badge. Rambo's just a copper rank, so he tells himself it doesn't count, but a real alchemist would turn their nose up at work like that. Arthur figured it out fast. If he wanted answers, he had to hunt down alchemists like Rambo, because chasing after everyone who just claimed the title was a total waste. He knew he had to get that information to Topias. No delay, no excuses. The heroes found themselves trapped inside a glass workshop, and a cold-eyed man barked orders, telling a young alchemist to get to work right now. Rambo unleashed his alchemical powers and started using them for real. Soon everyone else jumped in too, tossing their own hands to the glasswork. After they poured the glass into a separate mold, they leaned back and waited for it to cool. Arthur figured Rambo could crank out alchemical processing about 15 to 20 times a day. That still wasn't cutting it, so they pulled in Olaf, an alchemist with a copper rank, and now the two of them team up and hit harder together. With no glassblowers anywhere nearby, they had to track down Corbus. The guy was already retired. They even turned to teaching the slaves how to be glass blowers. Offs 21, Fritz 19, Dirk 17, Melchior 17. Fritz blurted out that there were way fewer impurities than expected, and they told him this special quartz sand was the kind used for making windows. The other heroes were stunned because this kind of sand could only be pulled from Donato's Berni, where the mountains are solid rock. Tobias said Donato's Berni was packed with jagged mountains and thick forests, but the people barely managed to grow enough food to feed themselves, and then he hit you with the real hope. Find a mine and the whole territory's money problems could flip overnight. The guy demanded to know why they shouldn't hunt for mines, and Tobias shut him down fast, saying there were more important things they had to handle. We've got to carve a road straight to the Mellow Barony. Fjölenadrop was the village built just for this purpose. But the monsters tore their village apart. So the project got shoved back. Arthur even wondered if that road could help glassmakers too, which would mean Tobias would have to bust even harder. The alchemists didn't stop. They kept grinding away at the glass, and one of them beamed, saying it was absolutely gorgeous, and the very next move was molding the lenses. At last, the heroes finally whip up a lens that changes everything. The guys were buzzing that this lens finally turned out surprisingly great, but Arthur wasn't even listening. Something off to the side snapped his focus. Lashina leaned in and told that gentleman, "This lens looks kinda weird, doesn't it?" She snatched the glass up in her hands and leaned in for a closer look. The girl slammed the lens down on a checkered board, stared through it, and nailed the flaw in the glass. Turns out the lens wasn't uniform in thickness, so the image warped and shifted depending on where it was placed. Rage burned in the heroes' chests when their first try crashed and burned. But the girl leaned in and said, "Real production starts with failure," then pushed them to try again and again until they finally hit the result they wanted. After a whole week of grinding, they finally forged the perfect lens. Arthur told them that by reshaping their molding process, they finally figured out how to crank out lenses every time, clean, sharp, and free of distortion. The first big investment came in way under what they expected, and the profits are already set to blow past every wild prediction. Suddenly an arrow tore through the forest air and slammed into a spider. The heroes pushed through the forest with their guards right beside them. Lucina snapped her gaze to Arthur as he moved in on the spider, and she demanded to know if he was really thinking about touching it. Arthur said it had to be done, because silk is spun straight from silkworm cocoons. The hero hacked off a chunk of the spider, certain he'd need that piece later. Everyone stared at him like he'd just unleashed a nightmare, and Archer even swore she'd aimed to dodge his belly, yet Arthur still came off as the strangest kid. The hero just shook his head, thinking that even if he could turn it into a thread, nobody would want to use something like that. The guards promised they'd sneak into the forest, then came back later, so Martina thanked them for their help and told them, "Don't worry, we're headed home." The house looked like a disaster zone. Martina snapped that they had to clean right now, because they hadn't been there in over a month. The heroes started hustling to tidy up the house. After a grueling day, the two girls crashed out and fell asleep. Right then, Mr. Arthur leaned in and started talking about his own work. Before him sat a piece of the spider he'd yanked from the forest, and Arthur snapped to it, time to get to work. For hours on end, right up to dusk, Mr. Arthur clawed and fought to make that thread. He finally gets his hands on samples of the thread fluid, and even the organ that churns it out. Lugina came sprinting up to him on the street, yelling, asking if that gentleman had seen the time, and Arthur snapped back, telling her to stare at the results of his grinding, hard-earned work. He told her the thread inside him was liquefied, so for now he'd call it a thread-like sack. Then Lugina snapped her eyes on him and yelled for him to run wash and change like right now. Then he wrapped it up by saying that even that skinny sack is coated in mucus too. Just outside the village, the guards stumbled onto something absolutely horrifying. That day, a colossal monster came crashing toward the man, snarling like it was about to destroy him. In the Helmendorf Mountains, one hunter simply vanished, no footsteps, no screams, not a single trace. Arthur was chowing down inside the house when something snapped his focus. He remembered crashing after work, dropping into sleep like he'd blacked out, because trying to keep up all day was brutal for a 5-year-old body. And if you really want to break down spiders, you'll need something sharp and surgical. The hero figured he'd come back later to have Lugina craft the right tools for his research. Then the group suddenly ended up in the village of Milf, where a guy sipping from a glass stopped them and immediately asked, "So where's the forge?" He demanded to know if they truly needed a dwarven blacksmith. Then Arthur told him to fire up the forge, only for the guy to snap back that the forge belonged to the Baron. Then Arthur pulled out the sheet and said his mother got the Baron's permission, right after they accepted Lugina. In his head, he made it crystal clear. He wasn't guessing at all. He'd actually shown that paper with the price for the glass information. The hero froze on the spot, waiting for the man to speak, and the words hit hard. The forge was only allowed if the Baron said yes, because the hero had every right to use it. Then he snapped a warning to Arthur. If that forge kicked on, they'd soon start ordering the stuff they used to grab from merchants. Arthur nodded in his head because yep, that's exactly what would happen. Helsedorf sits out on the far edge, and with fuel delivery costing a fortune, prices keep climbing. So forging stuff in the village is way pricier than just buying ready-made gear from merchants who crank it out for less and sell it for a steal. And just like that, the blacksmiths had zero work left, so the forge finally shut its doors for good. But now forge production could get way cheaper, for one big reason. Blacksmith Lugina gets treated like nothing but a slave. Since she's treated like a slave with no pay, the villagers think she'll work for free too, so now she's got to dodge their pressure hard or they'll try to use her. And yeah, Lugina's got other duties to juggle, so she can swing a hammer, at most just 1 or 2 days a week. The man shoved Arthur's words aside and demanded to know if he truly refused to use that dwarf for the village's sake. He kept fighting for Lugina, swearing she was family, and that hammering steel was how he looked after them, not some job orders meant to come from the side. The man kept pushing forward unshaken while she snapped, so tell me, how much can this girl really carry and still follow orders? Arthur shot back that it was just simple repairs, nothing more, then added crystal clear, they weren't doing it for free, so any job like that would get pushed to the back of the line. His opponent snapped, do you really think the villagers will just swallow your rules? And Arthur dug in his heels. If they wanted it, they'd have to win them over first, because either way, there wouldn't be nearly enough iron or fuel to make it happen. After those words hit him, his mind went still, like he was suddenly deep in thought. He nodded and promised to deliver his message to the villagers, and Arthur thanked him from the bottom of his heart. After that, the boy bolted back home, because he finally knew the forge could roar to life any moment now. The second the hero stepped into the house, every face turned on him with cold disappointment. Inside, everyone looked crushed, and his mother snapped his name out in panic. He immediately blurted out what happened, and Martina told him straight away that Hunter Hino hadn't come back from the forest. Arthur's jaw dropped the second those words hit him. Normally this hunter comes back right after midday, but now the time's here, and he's nowhere, still nowhere to be found. Horror washed over the boy's face when his mother snapped that if the hunter didn't come back soon, they'd send a search party out tomorrow morning, and Fauna would be dragged into it too. Arthur immediately demanded why Fauna had to go if she wasn't in the militia, and that's when they revealed the truth. Even as a slave, she still couldn't dodge the military draft. The hero feared that if this was a military draft, Lugina could get dragged away too. Then Martina shot back that Lugina was probably just a blacksmith, so nobody even bothered to mention her. The girl was terrified the hunter was just 3 hours late, and that delay still sparked such a brutal reaction that everyone instantly stayed on edge. Arthur strode up to the slave and asked, straight up, if she could manage it all by herself. She promised him everything would be okay, and since she already knew where Hino usually went, she figured she wouldn't have to travel far at all. The boy clenched his fist, and pure nerves sparked through his whole body. He barked at Lugina to open the forge right now, and the girl stared back at him, totally confused. Fauna from the slave's silver asterisk, this is where the story explodes. Both girls froze, stunned by what he just said. Then he leaned in and told her the sword Stephanus gave her was just plain iron, but if she really had to keep battling monsters, she'd need something way stronger. Arthur decided that since he couldn't fence and he couldn't cast spells, he'd turn that into power, making her a sword worthy of legends. The boy begged Fauna to hand over her sword so he could sharpen it, but she wouldn't even look his way or answer him. He clocked the shift in her face, and Lugina bolted off to grab the axe. Fauna yanked the hero in close and crushed him in a tight hug. She shot him a grateful smile and thanked him. He turned back to her with a tender, sweet look. Arthur and Lugina stormed out to forge their new sword. The hero stared at Stefan's request and started weighing how to pull it off. He remembered her telling him the blade's balance had to sit 2 fists up from the base, and that the first priority was landing clean, powerful cutting hits. Black hard silver, nicknamed Dwarven Silver, hits twice as strong as iron, shrugs off brutal temperatures, and only gets forged in a special dwarven furnace. So yeah, this is exactly why a plain old village oven won't cut it for what you're about to do. So yeah, this is where the hero's alchemy saves the day. Rig up the heating setup, crank the temperature to a scorching 9,000 degrees, and the metal will melt like it's nothing. The boy panicked because Lugina hadn't been blacksmithing in ages, so he blurted out, everything okay? She smiled and said she was fine. After all, if a dwarf forgets how to forge, then he never was a real dwarf to begin with. Arthur burst out laughing at her joke, but she clearly wasn't backing it up with anything serious. Then the hero leaned in and promised her this: if she finished Fauna's sword by morning, he'd reward her with the finest wine. In a blink, the girl slammed the gas, shouting that it was dead serious, and that she had to finish it right now. Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been way too hasty with his reward. The heroes burst into the forge. Then he leaned in and grilled his partner about exactly how they were going to forge this sword. She shot back that she wasn't asking for anything normal. She wanted him to shape a sphere on the left side of the axe. Usually they melt the metal and pour it into a mold, but this time they'd fold the metal instead, packing it tighter to crank up the cutting force. The hero figured it was just like forging a Japanese sword, but she stopped him cold. All you have to do is heat it. She warned him that unlike glass, this hard black silver shouldn't be refined at all, or it'll be ruined for good. He asked her if the black solid silver was an alloy, and she nodded right away, then let slip that the boost inside it came from a dwarven secret. Arthur got what Lugina meant, and the second it clicked, he knew this had dwarf monopoly written all over it. The girl barked, "Start it now." The hero dove headfirst into alchemy. The girl started showing off her blacksmith skills, one sharp swing at a time. The metal glowed nearly red, but it demanded more heat, way more, before it was ready. Then Arthur decided to slap in an extra circuit to crank the heating temperature even higher. The girl demanded they warm it up a bit more, until those black spots on the metal vanished. It just needed a little more heat to hit the perfect result. Suddenly, Lugina erupted into a shout that it was go time, then slammed into the forging of the metal. The heroes busted their butts to forge those metals. The heroes had been hammering away in the forge for hours, sparks flying like they were chasing a deadline. Arthur shot back, asking how much longer it'd take since they'd already been piling metal for 30 minutes, and Lashana answered, cold and certain, 3 more hours. Fauna swooped in with a basket and checked on the heroes' every move. She slammed the basket down beside them. After that, she slipped out, and the heroes never even clocked how she'd managed to show up and pay them a visit. After what felt like forever, the metal finally cooled into readiness. Lugina declared the folding was done, then snapped that it was break time, straight up, no debate. She bolted outside to breathe in fresh air, while Arthur clenched his teeth, because keeping that alchemical circle running was sucking down a mountain of mana, and he could feel just how bad things had gotten. The moment the heroes stepped out, they froze, because there was the basket left behind by Stefana. Inside the basket were food supplies, and a note that warned them not to push themselves too hard. The heroes were absolutely thrilled with Stephanie's gift. They beamed at each other, joy and gratitude spilling out like they'd just won the world. During the break, the heroes rush out to help everyone beyond the battlefield. Then the girl blurted out that the temperature had to be adjusted right away. Arthur nodded, said he got it, and stood by, ready for her next command. He told himself the pattern couldn't be swapped mid-move, so he gritted his teeth and started tweaking his mana instead. The hero snapped back into action and hit the job full force. Lugina slowly demanded a lower temperature, and Arthur immediately obeyed her every order. Time slipped through the hero's fingers, and with each moment passing, he slowly drove the temperature down. Suddenly, the girl snapped and demanded he crank the temperature up to the absolute max. The sword flashed and changed its color. Lugina kept hammering away, forging weapons harder and sharper to make her results finally hit. They teamed up to forge the ultimate sword for their friend, Stephanie. After what felt like forever, the heroes finally finished yet another stage of forging the sword, and Lugina lit up as she declared, "We crushed it, we did an amazing job." But when Arthur demanded to know if the blade was ready, she shook her head and said, "Not yet." After her answer, the boy crumpled to the ground, drained from sheer exhaustion. Arthur jolted awake in his own home. He was sprawled in bed, staring at the ceiling like something was about to explode. Martina burst into his room. The second he laid eyes on her, he started firing off non-stop questions about Lugina, Stefana, and the sword. Martina snapped at her son to calm down, because the sword was already drawn and ready, and Fania had it in her hands. Arthur seethed because he couldn't even see what kind of sword they were forging. Lady Martina snapped at him that he'd burned through way too much mana forging that sword, but Fauna still lit up with gratitude for what he and Lugina had accomplished together. She added that Lugina was already out cold. Then the boy shot a question about Heino, wondering if she'd never come back, and his mother confirmed it without hesitation. If it wasn't a mistake at all but a straight-up attack, what happens next depends on whether the attacker is a human or an animal, and the outcome changes completely. Even though Fuhlendorp was miles away, the hero told himself it was still close by, so the monster that hit their village probably wouldn't reach it. As Martina and Arthur barreled down the stairs, a violent crash exploded through the air. Lugina burst ahead toward the door, then the boy cut in, asking if she was awake already. A worried girl felt something awful had just struck, but Fauna strolled right through the door. Her outfit was shredded and filthy, and the heroes froze with terror the moment they saw her like that. Arthur yelled that she needed help right now, but the girl shot back that she was totally fine. Then she spun around to face Mrs. Tina. She swore it looked like Hannah had been slammed by orcs. Then she followed the trail and found a whole pack of them waiting. She revealed the orc crew was huge, about 50 of them. Over 50 orcs come crashing down on their village, and it's about to turn into a full-blown massacre. The heroes couldn't believe what they just heard, and pure shock hit them like a punch. Fauna told the heroes, "We already fired off messengers to the militia, and the city's defenses got way stronger, but it still isn't enough." They also ran into a tight little pack of several orcs, then pushed on with their recon to pin down their exact count. The bass they finally tracked down was way bigger than they ever expected. If there are still more orcs hiding in this database that they haven't uncovered yet, then the count is way bigger than they realize. Just as the girls started talking, a brutal orc howl tore through the air. Its scream ripped across the whole city, and every hero realized the orcs were already storming forward. Fauna bolted out of the house without a second to spare, and Arthur's shout tore through the air. This was impossible. It couldn't be happening. The girls screamed after them that the orcs were already at the pole, and they had to evacuate right now. Martina snapped at her son to pack only the essentials, and made it clear that Fauna and Lugina were already gearing up for evacuation too. Everyone crowds in, trading sharp ideas and pushing for the next move. Martina leaned across to the man and demanded answers. What was going on, and were they about to get into a fight? She had to know. The man shot back, asking why the dwarf wasn't a blacksmith since she was still an S-rank adventurer. He folded his arms, shot a question over his shoulder at the guy behind him, and caught himself hesitating mid-demand. The young man blurted out their plan. Right now they were gathering their forces at the southwest gate, since it was right beside the forest and that's where an attack was most likely to hit, while the northeast gate stayed jammed up and shut down, guarded by the leftover militia and a handful of volunteers. Martina demanded to know if they'd sent word to the Baronese capital. Then they admitted they did, but said the reinforcements wouldn't show up for at least 3 long days. He said, "For now we just have to hold the line, because charging straight in would get us killed for sure." Arthur figured that if their message burst into the baronial house fast enough, it would shoot straight to Rosanna, so they had to hang on until that moment. The young man barked orders at the slaves to guard the southwest gate and obey him. Then the heroes stared back at him with sharp, burning irritation. Martina strode up to the girls, grabbed their attention, and told them she and Arthur believed in them. Then she stepped back and let them do things their own way. Fauna said they could trust her, and Lugina backed every word with a steady nod. The guy beside them stared them down, mind spinning with questions, but he kept it all locked behind his teeth. The next morning, before the sun even peeked up, the orcs slammed into the fortress with an all-out attack, trying to smash through the southwestern gate by sheer force. The people perched above threw everything they had at the attack, shouting that they needed backup now. Martina and Arthur just stood on the sidelines, watching the city erupt. People screamed like it was totally expected. Orcs had hit the southwest gate, and someone else yelled for the wounded to get carried out. The heroes were freaking out, worrying sick about their loved ones, as the whole city teetered on the edge. Something lurking at the side snapped the boy's attention, and he shrieked in panic, completely lost on what was even happening. He couldn't stop thinking about why the orcs were crashing through the northeastern gate, like that place hadn't been built to hold them back. The guards were panicking, shouting for everyone to get in the way, stop them from crossing that threshold, and cling to those gates with every ounce of strength. A massive boulder got hurled straight into the city. St. Arthur stared at a massive boulder crushing onto the city street and thought, if this keeps up, we're going to shatter the whole city next. The child begged the gods for help, and right after that, another man jumped up and screamed for everyone to calm down, right now. Martina snapped to her son and said she was going to hold the shelter entrance no matter what, and the boy's face twisted with pure horror, because she'd never fought a day in her life. She locked eyes with him, answered with total confidence that everything was perfectly fine, then asked him for one last thing before the militia showed up. Arthur stared at his mother with a heavy, aching sadness. The boy grabbed her hand tight and swore he wouldn't let her go, not for any battle. Martina snatched his hand and clasped it in hers. She yanked her grip from her kid's hand, told him to stay right here, and then launched herself into the fight. Arthur watched his mother drift farther and farther away and realized one brutal thing. She had 0 combat experience, just classwork from the Noble Academy and attack magic. with no clue what a real battle actually looked like. The crowd behind the hero erupted into shouting as a massive group, led by a man, surged forward to hold the line from two directions, from the wall above and straight at the gate itself. The boy burst out in pure joy, shouting that the militia was back, so his mom could finally stop fighting. Laughing with pure joy, he sprinted toward his mother and yelled over her shoulder that the militia was already here, yet all she wanted was to turn around. Behind her, an orc lurched forward with a heavy cobblestone in hand and swung it straight at the girl. Just a second later, the cobblestone rocketed up into the air and shot forward. Right then, a stone materialized overhead, hovering above Mrs. Martina's head. Panic crushed Arthur so hard it felt like horror, and with shaking hands, he lifted his palm over the alchemical circle to force a materialization. A stone wall shot up from the ground, blocking the attack right in front of Martina's back. But the rock smashed into the fence, shattered it, and both heroes got slammed by the impact. Arthur got knocked back and crashed onto the ground over and over. After the impact, the hero crumpled to the ground, and not a muscle moved. He fought through the ache and forced his eyes open. There was his mother right in front of him. He tried to scream her name, but his voice wouldn't come out. Shouts erupted, "Slam the gates shut right now, and don't let even one orc slip inside." Moments later, monsters smashed through the gates and cannoned the people nearby aside like they were nothing. The men were trapped in the dirt, battered and spent, and an orc leaped forward, swinging his weapon right over the boy's head. Arthur sprawled on the ground, staring straight ahead. Then he spotted a townsfolk in trouble, right when a monster was getting ready to smash him. On the far side, where his mother lay, a second orc started creeping in, closing the distance fast. He shot his hand up over hers. Arthur saw it and sprang to his feet, yelling at his mother to run right now. Martina couldn't lift a finger, but from where she lay, she watched an orc in front of her stoop low toward her. The boy's grip on consciousness kept slipping, and his vision turned hazy, like the world was fading out. Right at the last second, he spotted an orc barreling in front of him, and the brute swung his weapon straight at his face. Suddenly, a man burst in and shoved the massive orc clear off the hero. Arthur stared at the man with pure awe, and the guy, without even glancing at Arthur, said he had just barely pulled it off in time. They showered the boy with praise, saying he was a really good kid. Arthur felt his chest clench like something was squeezing it, and he realized this crushing weight wasn't just pressure, it was pure fear. The man shot him an apology, then promised, "This will all be over soon." The next second, the guy was already gone into the distance, and Arthur figured it made sense. If he just saved him, he couldn't be the enemy. But that fear hit him harder than the moment the monster nearly crushed him with its blow, and even after it landed, his body kept trembling like it couldn't shake the terror off. Orcs surged back in and kept mowing down everyone in their path. But that guy handled them like it was nothing. He marched straight into those monsters and took them on solo. Several orcs burst in from every angle, but he cut through them in a flash like it was nothing. The mysterious man went toe-to-toe with every opponent, fighting without flinching until he knocked them all down. Not a single orc could take a hit from this stranger. His blade landed deadly blows on the very first strike. Later on, Lugina and Fauna tore through the city streets, hunting Mr. Tina and Mr. Arthur, yelling their names at the top of their lungs. The boy couldn't answer their cries. His vision dimmed fast like the world was fading to black, but luckily the girls snapped into action, found their hero, and screamed that things were dire and he needed treatment right now. Arthur's vision went dark, then after a while it snapped back. Rosanna rushed to his side, tears of relief spilling as she realized the boy had finally regained consciousness. He stared at her in shock, and she told him he'd slept for 5 whole days. Then it hit him, his mother. He demanded, "What's wrong with her and where is she?" The girl snapped back, "Martina's just over there, resting. She broke her left arm." The man lunged up to Arthur's bed and demanded, breathless, whether he'd finally woken up. This was the same man who carved the orcs out and saved the city, and the moment Arthur spotted him, his eyes flared with excitement. 1 second later, the boy's eyes fluttered shut, and he blacked out again. So the girl screamed his name and tore through the house, calling it again and again. Rosanna snapped that the man had scared the boy, so he got kicked out of the house. Then Arthur demanded, "Who was it?" Then the girl leaned in and told him the truth. This was a vessel. He was an A-rank adventurer, and everybody knew his nickname as Instant No Meal. She went on to say this time the attack, the assault on the northwest gate, was spearheaded by a rare kind of orc known as a dist orc. Orcs massive in strength and addicted to tearing everything apart are ranked as a top-tier target for the Adventurers Guild's destruction list. Shocked by what he heard, Arthur demanded to know if the village was okay, because ever since that day, the orcs had been storming in, pouring through in massive numbers. Rosanna flashed him a sweet smile and said everything was fine. because just that day, this same man had wiped out every last orc, and the boy couldn't help thinking, how is he even real? She said he'd finally get rescued, but right then it sounded like her sister had flagged the adventurer for something else. She told him that, of course, she was grateful to him this time, because Arthur just didn't get it. He couldn't shake the feeling she didn't like him. The boy lined in and demanded, so what's Vessel doing right now? She told him she'd ordered him to smash the orc settlement and then scout the land around it, and the boy nearly choked on her words. He'd assumed only elite adventurers got treated like this. The girl shot him a reassuring look and said, "Don't worry, you've got nothing to fear." Then she straight up told him to focus on healing first, because everything else could wait until he was back on his feet, so he'd better get better fast. A whole week tore by. With the shattered gates and busted barricades finally cleared away, the village snapped back into normal life. Meanwhile, the boy hit the books every single day, fighting through every page just to earn his shot at the Nobel Academy. He added that it looked like his mother had called Vessel to send her the very book he was studying right then. After a little time, he finally managed to greet the adventurer for real, and it clicked instantly. The fear in his guts came from the fact that the guy was practically overflowing with mana right at that moment. Right in the middle of all that chaos, he turned 6, and honestly, he wouldn't celebrate anything, because the only thing that changed was his age. And the venom he squeezed from that spider's belly had gone totally rotten. A whole month vanished in the blink of an eye. Arthur finally snapped back to full strength, and Lugina clung to him with all her heart, sobbing tears of pure joy because after everything, they both had made a complete recovery. He thanked Lugina for taking care of him, then admitted, yeah, sometimes his nerves got the best of him, and being around her made him feel awkward. Arthur admitted that, even then, he still couldn't quite figure out what kind of bond Vessel had with his mother. So much has blown up already, and today it all comes down to this. Arthur finally starts training with Wessel. When he spotted the wooden sword, the man swallowed hard and admitted it was tough for him to say anything. At the start, Arthur tore through everything looking for a weapon and still came up empty. The boy stared, shocked, and blurted, "Wait, so I don't even need a sword?" Wessel nodded and said, "Yeah, you really don't," then told him straight up it was better for him to go without weapons. The hero's words lit a fire in his chest, and he was fuming. The adventure breaks it down like this. Some people snap into action without thinking, and some people plan every move. Arthur is 100% the deliberate type, which is exactly why magic fits him perfectly. But right now, the only thing that matters to this kid is mastering how to run. He added that running away isn't just cowardice, it's a legit defense, so first he has to train himself to flee. Arthur was crushed with doubt, convinced he didn't stand a chance in combat, yet even with that sting, he refused to stop, pushing forward with his research like a true hero. Lugina stared at the focused Arthur, eyes aching, because it was for silk, B became a stretched thread, C and D turned sticky, so the real puzzle was how to fuse A and B into one thread. She leaned in and asked her master, "So, are you still locked in on your research?" He couldn't help but think, yep, even Lugina was having a blast. Then she practically ordered him to quit spiraling about spiders, at least until they were done eating. Martina stepped in, told the two of them to cool off, and said that after the orcs incident, Arthur suddenly had everyone's attention. Kids his age flooded too, coming just to watch him. So Martina hit on a great idea. If he had friends his age, he'd start going out to play with them way more often. Arthur's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but he still shot back, "Yeah, that's probably spot on." Training stacked on top of research, and even his ties with people started multiplying, so it felt like Arthur's workload kept exploding bigger and bigger. In the yard, a boy swung a stick like a blade and yelled, "I'm an instant sword," then dared the evil orc to be scared of him. Arthur marched up to him, and a boy snapped a stick right at his face. The hero stared at the man across from him, but it took a beat before he finally got what the guy was after. Then he finally found his bearings, dropped to the ground, and let out a furious scream, claiming he'd been beaten. The boy drove his foot onto the hero, then yelled that one day he'd become an instant, without a sword, just like that. Arthur told them the boy was Rodebel, and the tale of how Vessel saved the village blew up so hard with kids that they started acting it out in their games. But from the hero's point of view, Vessel is nothing but a scatterbrained, freedom-chasing mess. The boy whipped around to Al and blurted out a question. If the mighty swordless one was training him, then why not train him too? The hero nodded, already warning that if things went that way, it'd be dull as dishwater. First, you've got to balance on one leg, and for kids, it's not about raw strength yet, it's all about controlling their body. Then Arthur shoots his leg straight out in front, and to build his strength he keeps alternating, front to back to front, switching legs every step. Raudible obeyed his orders, but after a while he sighed that it was dull and begged him to fire up instant swordless again. The boy launched into the game like he couldn't wait to see what happened next. Later he was already home, planted in front of a mountain of papers, and the thoughts in Arthur's head started to click into place. You can't recreate the spider's thread maker, so you carve grooves from the middle out to the rim on a round plate, then slap a lid over it. As it spins, centrifugal force squeezes out a thin thread that has to be snapped free right there. Seriously, picture the whole machine like cotton candy being spun. Al held up his drawing for Lugina, and she leaned in, staring at it like every detail mattered. He leaned in and demanded to know what she thought of his idea. She said the thread engraving was way too delicate for her failing eyes, but she could still build the rotating mechanism, gears and all. Arthur's face lit up. Perfect, then I'll hand this job to you. Then he leaned in and asked her straight up what metal would be best for the disc. Tin didn't flinch. He calmly said they needed a metal that could bend and still carve deep grooves, and that light, hard iron was exactly the best choice for the job. I had no idea what she meant by light iron. Then the girl broke it down. This stuff is basically iron strength, but way lighter. It's rare, it's a pain to process, so nobody uses it much, and that's exactly why it was perfect for Arthur's job. Lugina told her they'd forge engraving tools out of the leftover dwarven silver, and Al's face lit up. She was already itching to start making them. The heroes plunged right back into action, side by side in the forge, hammering out every tool they'd need for the heroes' research. Right in front of them loomed the thing they'd built with their own hands. But the real nightmare was the thread. Arthur grabbed it and it snapped on the spot, right after he picked it up. Then Lugina slid a uterus into the machine and a thread slowly crawled out. She grabbed a piece, shoved it toward Al and asked what he thought, and he leaned in and said, "That's thread A, it's made of liquid, not quite as slick as silk, but bright, tough, and surprisingly strong." Lugina started to break it down, saying a turns into liquid B. The hero figured it wouldn't stretch like rubber, then watched it do exactly that, so he blurted to the girl that if he turned it into fabric, he could craft elastic clothes. Al slammed the table and said they had to spin up even more thread, but Lugina shot back that they couldn't because they'd run out of raw material. Then a cheerful Arthur bounced in and said they'd have to hunt a ton of spiders. Lugina let out a scream of pure terror. Once the heroes had hauled in enough raw materials, the boys started pacing and wondering, how were they going to kick off their work the right way? He told them they had to figure out how to turn that into fabric and clothes, so they needed to find someone in the village who actually knew how to weave. But Lugina snapped that the village didn't have a single loom. Every scrap of cloth was bought straight from merchants, and the boy agreed just like that. Then the hero started talking it out loud, grimly realizing that hauling himself to Melu State just to get the fabric made would chew up way too much time, so he figured, why not do what they did with the glassworks? Sell it to someone who can handle it for them. Right then Lugina's mind snapped to something she couldn't ignore. She yanked him by the shirt. He screamed at the top of his lungs. The girl screamed right in his face. So tell me, did he really have zero attachment to anything he built with his own hands? Arthur stared at the girl in total disbelief, and she kept going, admitting that sure, she didn't like spiders either, but somehow hanging out with him made it feel fun. And she couldn't just turn it down. Before she even finished her sentence, something snapped in her neck. The girl crumpled onto the floor and Arthur's blood went cold.